like those of a fat, cowering mouse, the priest's eyeballs spun around and around as he observed his surroundings.
Assuring Sister El-Melloi isn't around here. Though she established a telepathic connection with you, she will not be able to monitor your every move.
Basak added quietly.
Father Fernando, can I hear your personal opinion?
All right.
Observant, the priest cleared his throat and timidly attempted to read Bazak's expression. Of course, the gravekeeper's face remained devoid of emotion. Giving up on trying to figure out what the gravekeeper was thinking, his round jaw shook as he finally opened his lips and answered the question.
As a representative of the Holy Church, I certainly think that King Arthur is a heretic. Even if we wanted to bring it under our religion, that way of existence is too deeply rooted in local traditions.
Analytical, the priest's interpretation was incredibly standard for the Holy Church. Though many of the legends about King Arthur were heavily influenced by that religion, they were no longer applicable in modern times. After all, regardless of whether it was the court magician, the enchantress, or the king herself, they all could not be separated from local beliefs. However, one of the gravekeeper's eyebrows twitched.
But this has nothing to do with that girl at all, right?
The summer breeze began to pick up.
They're unrelated.
They can't be related, can they? Isn't this village just pushing the beliefs of the past onto future generations and forcing other people to get sacrificed?
Observant, for a moment, his face was full of joy, like that of a traveller who is finally able to put down his bag after a long journey. However, that joy was quickly overshadowed.
I'm not qualified to be saying that, though.
Why?
Bitter, because of that incident 10 years ago. I was the one who reported the changing of Gray's face to the Holy Church.
Bazak did not say anything, not even a remark like, "I knew all along," or "that was a surprise."
I didn't think that things would get so serious back then. Of course, I felt a bit uneasy with the prospect that a girl's face changed overnight, but I dismissed it as puberty when I found out that she was still the same person. I just thought that the villagers' attitude towards her was worth reporting, especially her mother's.
A wry smile appeared on the priest's lips. No one in the village was unaware of how devoted that mother was to her daughter. The only reason why the faith in King Arthur, which had diminished for millennia, was on the rise again, was because of that mother and the village elder.
So I wrote it in my periodic reports, just in case. That's all I did. And then, after a while, I heard that Sister El-Melloi was being sent here. She's a true member of the Holy Church, a prodigy trained by the chivalric order and given the power to expel mages and non-human creatures alike. She's not like me, who was sent here forcibly to stand guard because I had the tiniest bit of talent.
Bitter, the priest wiped at his sweat and smiled a bitter smile.
Bitter, she keeps telling me that if there's something that might endanger the Holy Church, removing it from its roots is also part of the Lord's teachings. She must be correct. Actually, the two of us are from different factions. If we were born a couple centuries earlier, I would probably get hunted down by her for being a heretic.
Such was the history of that religion. In a sense, they hated the heretics that stemmed from their own religion, more than they hated other religions. The more their values aligned, the less they could tolerate minor differences. Perhaps that was just the nature of humanity.
I'm mumbling. For that reason, I'm not qualified to be saying all this. Of course, I'm sure that what I did back then was not punishable, considering what my role was. Though I know that, I've wondered these years whether I can really claim to be upholding the Holy Order. What? Your expression has gone all strange. Did I say anything ridiculous?
Oh. No, it isn't.
After a pause, the gravekeeper continued.
grateful. I'm just thankful to the things I believe in, that not everything in the village is a lie. At least what you saw in that village was the same as what I saw.
Ha! Ha! Sincere. What side do you plan on standing on?
Questioning which side do I stand on?
On the side of the Holy Church? Or on the side of the villagers? I know you have connections to the government. Illumia's quite sensitive toward these things. But you're not a spy, are you? The gravekeepers of Blackmoor Graveyard outdate King Arthur. Therefore, you don't worship King Arthur, like the other villagers. If you stand on our side, it won't distort your beliefs, will it?
Hearing the priest's words, the gravekeeper raised one eyebrow in surprise.
I think I understand why the Holy Church chose you as a supervisor. Under most circumstances, no one is better at acclimating heretics than you are.
Are you complimenting me?
That was what I intended to do, yes. I plan on protecting that girl as the gravekeeper of Blackmoor Graveyard.
Worried if that's the case. You...
Even if we hand Grey to the Holy Church, there's no way to guarantee her safety. Sure, it is possible to ask for forgiveness in your religion, but that does not apply to our. Forgiveness is meant for humans. There is no need to uphold the same standards for us inhuman folk.
Well, you're not wrong.
Some grateful, thank you for your concern, though.
Basak bowed his head in thanks. Then he suddenly crossed his arms and leaned back on a tree, like Father Fernando was doing, and closed his eyes.
I didn't see anything or meet anyone here. I closed my eyes because I was a little tired, and if anyone passed by here in the last couple of minutes, I didn't notice their presence.
I still have things I want to say, but I suppose I can only thank you for now.
Fernando puffed up his chest proudly and continued to walk up the mountain. A voice came from behind him.
The next time we meet, we'll have to fight each other for our lives.
Nah. Oh. Please, spare me.
The priest said in a distressed voice, and stumbled up the slope, trembling. Though he huffily wiped at his sweat with his soaked cassock, he did not stop walking. Right as the priest disappeared in the fog in the distance, Basak slowly opened his eyes. With footsteps that didn't show a trace of fatigue, he also continued walking upward. The swamp was right up ahead. The final battle would probably happen there, the gravekeeper thought. The lie that had been maintained in that village up to now was about to fall apart. The peace that everyone wished would continue was going to end. Recognizing the voice, Basak began to run as if he had been knocked into the air. He reached the origin of the voice with an amazing speed. His eyes widened as he saw what was there.
Yes?
Shocked, the priest lay there on the floor. His clothes were stained red by blood. Basak rushed over hurriedly, put a hand on Father Fernando's neck, and stiffened.
Come, he's dead. But Fernando had only been out of Berzak's line of sight for a couple of minutes. What had happened in the space of a few short minutes? Did he get stabbed in the back with a dagger or something?
Analytical, Basak muttered as he examined the priest's blood-stained back. It went without saying that Father Fernando had never received any kind of combat training, so as long as his killer caught him by surprise, anyone in the village could have killed him. But who could it be? Fernando should have been incredibly cautious. The only person he would have let his guard down around would be Illumia, but she had no incentive to kill the priest. Basak also noticed another unbelievable thing.
His clothes are dry?
Urgent, we ran down the mountain after my mentor, and were about to reach the swamp. Trimmel cut through the dense shrubbery in front of us, creating a path. I suppose that was the most fitting job for her, considering that she didn't get tired. Though my mentor was usually the first person to collapse from exhaustion, this time he tried his best to endure and continued walking down the steep slope. The knight, Sir Kay, guarded our rear, and I stayed close to my mentor. Ad still remained as a scythe in my hands and showed no sign of waking up. Realizing this, I bit my lip. At that moment, my mentor spoke.
Is it really a good idea to just face the villagers like this?
I think we can do it.
Probing, your mother might be there?
It's okay, I know. Determined, I nodded twice. The shock that came from knowing that they launched an all-out search of the mountain was temporary, because from the moment we became enemies of the village, I understood that I would have to confront my mother. Let's not talk about that now. What did you find out just then? What has Heartless been doing here?
Though I have a basic understanding of what's written on the evidence board, I only have hypotheses about what exactly he was planning. I do have a theory about what he was doing before the incident, though.
Before the incident?
Analytical, it's something that happened during the first cycle. Bersac told me that on the first day, someone broke multiple rules.
I recalled what Rhaenys had told me. After they talked to Zephyr, Bersac had said something and asked them if they knew something about it. When children play outside, sometimes the rules get broken. But this time, 2 rules were broken.
Yet was actually caused by Heartless approaching the village at night, possibly to make final preparations or something along those lines. After that, he left straight away without praying to the Black Madonna.
He left. True. This way, 2 rules would be broken. The one about going out at night, and the one about praying to the Black Madonna. Then what about when he came?
Analytical, that hut was built on the other end of the swamp. It's probably outside the detection range of the Magecraft. He might still have broken the rules, though. Bersac said that some rules would be broken once in a while, such as the one about going out at night. I suppose he doesn't care that much about them anyway.
That was a reasonable statement. But if that was the case, how long had Heartless secretly been in this village? How much time had he spent staying just outside of the village and spying on us? An eerie feeling coiled up at the bottom of my heart. It was a different type of raw disgust to the one I had felt when I had been told of the secret of this village. It made me feel as if I had been watched by the gaze of an insect instead of a human. We had only ever met once, on the rail Zeppelin, but that encounter alone was enough for me to discern something inhuman about that man. What did it mean, then, if that kind of person had watched me for a long period of time?
Analytical Heartless never really involves himself in cases. Other than when he provided funds in the case of the Twin Towers of Ilsema, he's probably also related to many other incidents. Most of them are heavily covered up, though. If he didn't do so, he'd end up getting targeted by something.
After saying that much, he paused for a few seconds before he continued to speak.
I was the one who happened to put an end to that.
I see. So that's why the evidence board, or whatever it's called, is there. Understandable. That means that the turning point of this case was...
In response to the knight's somewhat cheerful words, my mentor nodded sternly.
Yes, it was me.
Why would it be you?
Analytical, think about why the Holy Church would choose to act now. Since a Lord of the Clock Tower has come to visit, I don't think it would continue to idly stand by. At least Heartless believed that was the case. That's why he left.
I clenched my fists. This was only logical. My mentor was at least still one of only 12 Lords of the Clock Tower, and his every move had to be watched. Something like a lord, visiting the village they were watching over as the 5th Holy Grail War, and the revival of King Arthur loomed just over the horizon, couldn't just be dismissed as a coincidence. Even though it was such a natural conclusion, I had overlooked it.
Unanalytical, Heartless probably never anticipated that I would come to the village. Yes, it's incredibly unexpected that one of the 12 lords would recklessly visit this village. Even if he isn't behind everything, he plays a role in this case.
We will be there soon,
The Mercury Maid said softly. Just as she said, the forest immediately broke away to reveal flat land. The light of the rising sun gently pricked my eyes. The swamp was right in front of us. Though I'd gotten close to this place before, now that I was right in front of it, I thought that it was a bit too big for a swamp. Though the waters were muddy now, it might have been clearer in the past. Gradually, the beams of sunlight expanded their dominion, creeping slowly across the mountain slopes. However, I could not appreciate this breathtaking sight. Dawn was breaking. That meant...
Grim, it's almost time for you to die. No, it's almost the time you died in the past.
He spoke as if it was his duty to speak the truth whenever he saw it. That was probably why so many mages hated him. Because the veil of mystery that concealed the truth was an indispensable wall of defense that protected magecraft.
Therefore, it definitely won't deviate from this timeline.
Fateful, he uttered those words as he stared toward the swamp. Dash. And then, as if that was a prophecy, something appeared. It was much larger than a person. A familiar building emerged from the water. No. It wasn't just familiar. Actually, it was something that I had seen mere hours ago. The most unforgettable thing was the statue near the entrance that was now illuminated by the morning light. One half of the temple rose through the water and joined with the other half, as if they were forming a bridge. That temple has come up from the water. Amazed, I mumbled in confusion as I saw the sight which I could never have dreamed up of. Rising in the thin mist of the dawn was, indeed, the underground temple we had found before we fought with the Husk King. Of course, according to the laws of physics, the stone structure and the foundations supporting it could never have risen from the swamp. This was undoubtedly the result of mystery, of a scale that was beyond the reach of modern mages.
Ah, damn it, is that what it is? Those idiot mages really care about this kind of crap.
The knight said beside me. The flippant attitude from before had disappeared completely. The Knight of the Round Table gritted his teeth.
Avalon.
Excited W, what is that? Where'd it come from? How'd it get up here?
The voice was more like that of a child getting excited over a new toy than someone who was genuinely surprised.
Didn't you say that the structure was unnatural?
Analytical. Indeed, Flat, who had been in charge of adjusting the parameters, had said that when the flood happened. The structure of that place is pretty unnatural anyway. Let me think that means that we can use this method to mess with this place that looks like the past, right? It was the reason why it was relatively easy for Flat to intervene and how Zepia accepted their success. These two things originated from the same place. In other words, the reason why Flat was able to cause a flood was that there was already such a structure underground.
In order to raise it, there's actually a sequence that needs to be followed. I actually had to spend quite a bit of effort to skip all of that. The program to dispel the bounded field at the same time the temple started rising seems to have run perfectly.
In response to Zepia's words, Flat looked up.
So, you're saying that you completely countered my attack by turning my intervention against me?
That isn't the area your instructor specializes in, so I don't suppose he ever taught you this. Intervention through magecraft contains techniques from all sorts of systems. Simply using regular circuits in an unorthodox way isn't an ability, though it doesn't happen very often. When a mage meets a hacker, there are some techniques that are commonly used.
Mysterious, the finger of the alchemist seemed to be striking on the keys of an invisible keyboard. Every action that he made seemed to play on a magical note in the world which resembled the past that Lord El-Melloi II was currently within. Perhaps it was these notes which were inaudible to the human ear that were rocking the foundations of the world itself.
Proud for me. This is a rare, golden opportunity for me to showcase the abilities which I have long forgotten about.
Aha! That's awesome! I didn't know that magecraft could be used that way. The Atlas Institute's really full of mysteries, like a collectible card game that's been out for a couple decades. Henoid, can you calm down for a bit?
Svein warned his classmate as he stared intently at the crystal ball. In its reflection, their beloved lecturer of the clock tower faced the rising tower.
Let's see. Can you arrive at the mystery you are to solve, Lord El-Melloi II?
Avalon. Of course I knew that name. It was the place where the dead King Arthur had been carried to, and where he would be revived. It wouldn't be a stretch to call that place the most sacred place in Britain, and yet, it's the temple over there.
Explaining it's probably not the real Avalon, but rather something based on the legend. Just like Sir Kay said, analogies are incredibly important in magecraft.
Muttering? Ha! Surprisingly knowledgeable, huh?
As if he admired him. However, I felt that those words were more than his feelings on the matter. There was something else, but I couldn't say that I understood his thoughts very well.
According to the evidence board, the body, mind, and soul will combine into one in that temple.
My body would be sacrificed in that sacred place. If that was the case, the Husk King would also be waiting there, as the mind.
Annoyed, the villagers are all heading into the swamp from the bridge-like thing. I don't know if they already knew this was going to happen, but they're probably holding hands, being all nice to each other, and anticipating your arrival. But if we're just going to walk straight in there, we're going to lose spectacularly. If she pulls out that black lance again, it won't be a question of whether we'll survive. The entire mountain will probably get blown into smithereens. I guess it'd be a quick, painless death, but that's still a stupid ending.
It won't happen.
Hearing a voice that denied what he said, the knight turned around.
Certain something like that is not going to happen.
There was a calm certainty in my mentor's words. Soon after this, I would learn the meaning of those words. That was to say, the ending of this second cycle. Chapter 4. Tilda. A few bridges had been created with the temple at its centre. That was probably also part of the mechanism. The water that still remained on the stone floorboards also seemed to be slowly draining away. The temple, which had now been doused in water, looked completely different from when it was underground, and gave off an air of majesty. Perhaps this was its original form. I could think of many legends about temples regaining their sacred appearances after returning to the surface from the mouldy underground. In ancient legends, dead gods would also regain their glory after returning from the underworld. A couple of groups of people had gathered at the entrance to the temple. One group was the villagers. There were a few dozen of them, each carrying an old axe or hoe, and keeping a close eye on us. The rest of them were probably absent either because they were too old or because they still could not move.
It's the body. The body of King Arthur.
Hearing their whispers, I could not help but clamp my eyes shut. Would they no longer call me Grey? Behind them, there were two people. One was a female representative, and the other was the old woman. Mother and Granny. "You stupid girl," said the old woman in a low voice. My mother did not say anything. My figure was reflected emotionlessly in her blank, glass-like eyes. Even at a time like this, their expression toward me did not change. The other group was composed solely of Sister Illumia. She was only wearing her nun's clothing, and she seemed relaxed, only looking toward the villagers, as if to say that even alone she could go up against all the villagers. No, this was probably the truth. With the physical prowess she displayed, it wouldn't take anything for her to defeat a group of regular villagers. Actually, it was the villagers who looked terrified. No matter how fervent their belief was, it was difficult to turn inexperienced people into warriors. Cyril, and then, at an equal distance from both of the parties, were the bone soldiers. Looking at the three groups gave me a surreal feeling. The ending that nobody had predicted had arrived.
Oh, dos estranhos se voiça quer dir.
Aren't you guys fighting?
Do you think this is the time to fight? After I discovered the mechanism in the swamp, I thought I was going to be the first one here. When I got here, though, it already become like this. Oh, that means I'm the first to witness. Does that make me unreliable?
The nun pointed her chin in that direction. She was probably telling the truth. There were no signs of a fight in the surrounding area. Even if it was Sister Illumia, she wouldn't have come out of a fight with that person completely unharmed. However, why would it end up like this? Said the old woman, in a voice that reminded me of a string that had finally snapped. Even the old woman who had done so much for her beliefs had finally lost her fervour. Yes, there was no need to stop them. There was no need at all, for the thing that they had given up their lives for had already been taken away from them.
What happened?
Shocked. Even the knights, Sir Kay's voice was full of confusion. Everyone's gaze was focused on something behind the bone soldiers, right underneath the Black Madonna statue. Someone lay there, in the place that was supposed to be this altar. I had seen this before. Though I had forgotten it, though I should have forgotten it, when this scene appeared in front of my eyes, I recalled it. An intense headache hit me. The pain made me see a flash of white and dug out memories that had been lodged even deeper in my mind. The first thing I remembered was the smell. The smell of rotting weeds and water. The miasma made it feel like my throat was going to rot as I breathed it in. Back then, perhaps the swamp was murkier than it was now, swirling around my nasal cavity. This odour might even have caused disease if I breathed it for too long. The sound came next. It was the sound of the shrieking of what seemed like hundreds of ravens. Next to that, someone was yelling at me.
You did something to me.
That ending had been revealed. Husk King died. Shocked, my voice didn't even sound like my own. Behind the bone soldiers and under the gaze of the Black Madonna, a pool of red blood had formed around the neck of the fallen girl. It was evidently a fatal wound. The girl lay unmoving on the altar. The blood had long since started to spread, and was now drying from the edges. What lay there was now simply an object, a hunk of meat devoid of life. Hugh, why? My voice sounded like someone else's entirely. I was not completely unprepared for this. Since I had survived the first cycle, while someone who looked like me had died, there was only one person who that could be. For that reason, I had a vague premonition that the same would happen in the second cycle as well. There had to be some sort of reason for this. Somehow, the Husk King had suddenly died, as if the tide of the events that had suddenly shifted. Just as I was reeling from the shock of this, another person appeared from the bridge in the direction of the village.
How did this happen?
Bursag. It was the gravekeeper of Blackmore Graveyard, and my other teacher who had taught me how to fight and survive. As he looked at the corpse of the Husk King, his serious expression did not change a bit.
On the way here, I found the corpse of Father Fernando. It looked like he had been fighting someone. Just to be clear, I didn't kill him.
What? You killed a priest?
Sister Illumia exclaimed, whirling around with her exquisite eyebrows raised.
I said, wasn't me.
Shocked, I stared at him with widened eyes. How? It almost felt like a serial murder case. Had this happened as well during the first cycle? The deaths of Father Fernando and the Husk King seemed to have dropped a huge bomb onto the current situation. It was too sudden and too difficult to accept. What had happened to cause this? My temples with my hands to try and stop my headache when I heard a strange creaking sound. What was it? It sounded like tapes were being burnt, or like the edges of documents were being singed. Just as my attention was drawn to this sound, my mentor spoke.
So it did end up like this.
Questioning. Did you predict that this would happen, Lord El-Melloi II?
Indeed, my mentor had said something about how we wouldn't fight the Husk King. Was that because he had already predicted her death?
Explaining during the first cycle, Bursak told me that Gray's corpse had appeared next to the Black Madonna, so no one would try to follow us. I thought back then that they had discovered it in the church, but that there is another Black Madonna. Of course, Bursak didn't have time to explain to me back then. If that's the case, since this isn't the past, I think it has to be settled here.
My mentor said quietly, so the people around us wouldn't hear us discussing the past. However hard we tried to explain to the people here, they probably wouldn't understand that this world was actually a reenactment.
This place isn't the past?
I've been wondering if this place isn't the past, what is it? If we assume that it's just a simulation, there shouldn't be a need to send us to a specific point in the past. What's important is the meaning to this reenactment.
After he said that, he turned to look in a different direction.
Magdalena?
He called out. For a moment, I was confused as to whose name that was, because, though it was my mother's name, nobody in the village ever called her that.
That's your name, right? I've heard Gray bring it up before.
Have I brought it up before? I couldn't remember. Perhaps I did mention that name once or twice in all the conversations I had had after arriving in London.
Only you know why this ending happened.
Confused? What do you mean?
Shocked, my mother's expression did not change. No, that only lasted for a couple of seconds. As if the plaster that had been on her face had suddenly fallen apart, her expression began to violently contort.
Panicked? How do you know? Unless you're...
She moaned, and began to run with stumbling steps. Ripples formed under her feet in the water still on the floor of the temple as she rushed defenselessly towards the bone soldiers.
Urgent. Ugh. Trim out.
My mentor shot out a magic bullet and called for the Mercury Maid's help. Her limbs immediately dissolved, and then turned into sharp blades. She slashed through the bone soldiers who were trying to guard the Husk King's corpse and cleared out a path for my mother.
Annoyed, what a pain in the ass.
The knight complained, sticking his tongue out and pulling out his sword. Trimmal, the knight, Sir Kay, and I all rushed forward to meet the bone soldiers' attacks. Because everything had been so sudden, the old woman and the other villagers had not had time to react yet. Just as the blades of the bone soldiers were about to land on their heads, someone charged in and used his giant axe to block the blows. Mr. Bazaar.
Determined I'm prepared to be your enemy, but I won't stand there and watch my former companions die.
The gravekeeper raised his hand and summoned a group of spirit ravens. The ravens swooped down and pecked apart many of the bone soldiers, while others were crushed under Bazak's axe. Though there were still a lot of bone soldiers, they were not enough to overwhelm the gravekeeper. Perhaps because she didn't care about the villagers much, Sister Illumia only watched from the side, occasionally using one hand to deal with the bone soldiers that attempted to attack her. As that happened, my mentor cautiously walked over and extended a hand.
Are you all right, lady?
He asked, helping my mother up. I still had no idea what had happened. Why would my mother rush toward the bone soldiers? Why would my mentor try to save her? No. What confused me most of all was why I felt so relieved. I knew so clearly that my mother only saw me as a subject of worship, and yet I still felt thankful that she was safe, like an idiot.
Muttering,
my mother muttered, and my mentor nodded gently.
Gray, Trimma, are you holding up?
We were all right. Perhaps because the Husk King wasn't alive anymore, Bazak the knight, Sir Kay, and I were able to hold off the bone soldiers.
Well, then, let's continue the lecture. Have you ever seen the Husk King's face?
The old woman did not answer my mentor's question immediately. After a while, she shook her wrinkled head. There's no need for that.
Analytical, exactly. Such is the nature of faith. Gods only exist when people believe in them, and even if there isn't a taboo against seeking their true appearance, it's only natural to not wish to do so. This isn't an accusation, because I also believed in what you do, once. After all, from a certain distance, it's impossible to tell who someone is if they're wearing armor.
Analytical, my mentor said, shaking his head. What are you talking about?
Analytical, I just wanted to make sure. I'm sure no one here is aware of this, but when we first escaped from the village, Gray had been in a state of mental distress. The only way I figured out that there had been unrest among the villagers was through my own deductions. If it wasn't for the fact that all the villagers were on the move, I wouldn't have been able to leave successfully. Yes, for that reason, I can conclude that nobody checked her true appearance, and everyone believed that the one who died was Gray.
That was true. But what was my mentor trying to say? Mysterious as I parried the bone soldiers' attacks, I heard that strange sound again. The noise became faster and faster and seemed to envelop the entire temple. That was not all. Soon, a web of tiny cracks appeared in the swamp around the temple. The clearly unnatural cracks appeared on the surface of the water and showed no sign of disappearing. It was as if the noise was a cacophony meant to interfere with the whole world. "Sir, the swamp is falling apart. Sir, the swamp is falling apart. Guarding his back, guarding his back."
Yes, but it seems that the only ones who noticed are the two of us and Sir Kay. The reason for that is probably because we are all from the outside world. So, in other words, the
Confused. Correction?
how planing something like that appears quite frequently in science fiction. Actually, a similar theory exists in magecraft, where it is believed that time is under some sort of directional influence. Though this place is not the past, something similar probably exists here.
Hearing my mentor's words, I blinked. A correctional force. If that was the case, did the Husk King die for the same reason she did during the first cycle?
The time for the play has already been decided. No matter how grand the performance may be, no matter how many encores may be enacted, or perhaps precisely for that reason, every show must come to an end. An unyielding, illogical, inexorable end takes machina.
I had heard this phrase before. In ancient Greek plays, people would have the gods suddenly appear when the plot reached a deadlock by delivering judgment or resolving conflict. The deus ex machina was created for this reason. Perhaps this was acceptable for an ancient play. Even in later decades, people said that it could stay for its beauty, and so the story of how the scholar who lost to the demons was miraculously saved by angels was greeted with thunderous applause. And now, what meaning did that phrase hold? How would this play end? And most importantly, in this situation, who was the god in question? Then the reason why you rushed here was...
Exactly. This stage only exists at this exact time. The ending will be here soon, so we must get here in time, because only the people who usher in this moment will be fixed onto the stage.
My mentor looked up at the center of the mass of bone soldiers.
Gray, can you clear a path to the Husk King, please?
He said calmly as he gazed toward the Husk King's corpse. Yes. Hearing his words, I began to swing my scythe. Perhaps because we weren't underground anymore, my strengthening abilities had recovered somewhat. Tremo and I worked together and carved out a path for my mentor. With my mother in tow and with the help of magic bullets, he finally reached the corpse. He gazed at the wretched corpse for a while before extending a hand.
Suspicious? What are you doing, Lord El-Melloi II?
As you can see, Dash, this is her true face.
Dramatic, he removed the mask. The sound of the mask hitting the floor was softer than I had expected. Nobody else would probably pay any attention to that sound, though, for I was struck speechless by that face. Of course. I had also believed in it without a doubt. She was, without question, the mind of King Arthur. Even without that dark rongomaniad, her very existence resonated with mine, so I believed that there would be a face identical to mine under that mask. However, it was... Shocked, I moaned, and collapsed to the floor like the mask. The face beneath the mask, though it looked very young, it was impossible to mistake it for anything else, was that of my mother.
It's like this. You are both the victim and the culprit, Magdalena Na.
My mentor announced, as my mother stood there, frozen. I didn't know. I didn't have this kind of memory. But my heart still remembered it. Though it had been erased from the surface of my mind, the information still existed, carved deep into me, floating up like bubbles from a deep, dark ocean and announcing its presence. That memory had not disappeared. The smell of rotting weeds and water, the piercing cries of ravens. That was it. Someone was lying there. It wasn't me. But it was someone who looked like me, someone who used to look like me.
Why? Why did you make me into you?
As reminiscent they were thoughts that had not been converted into language, They were the crisscrossing thoughts of someone right next to me. It was a conversation that should not have been heard by anyone. The only reason why I heard it was probably because I had almost completely lost consciousness and entered some kind of strange, hazy state. If that was the case, the reason why I perceived those thoughts as sounds was because my brain had interpreted the characteristics of those thoughts.
I'm sorry.
That was a voice I was familiar with. It was a voice that I had known for a long time.
You were meant to have taken that child's body, and that is why you have waited here. I'm sorry. That is the only thing I can't tolerate.
I knew that calm, steady tone, so steady that it terrified me. I had thought that I could never disobey this person. I had believed that I would forever live under this person's command. The thoughts ended here. Less than a minute had actually passed. And then...
You did something to chew me?
I finally understood those thoughts of the Husk King, which manifested soundlessly inside my mind. Shocked, it was said that when exposed to shocks, human brains will sometimes block out information from the outside world. I only had enough brain capacity to process the information that had just been revealed to me. My senses had stopped functioning briefly, and the world suddenly seemed to freeze, like an old movie playing from a damaged film. Though I was in the middle of a battle, I couldn't do anything except reflexively dodge the bone soldiers' attacks. However, my mentor continued to speak.
Analytical, it's actually not quite accurate to call you the culprit. Though I say that, it's different if I say that you were once the culprit. Perhaps a better way to say it would be that in the original timeline you would have gone with your plan and became the killer.
Disbelieving? That means
My mother said in a low voice. She glanced at the unmasked person who looked exactly like herself, and immediately looked back to my mentor.
Huh.
I didn't know why, but my mentor's voice was incredibly gentle and calm.
Reassuring you've already achieved your goal. I can assure you not a single day of your effort was wasted.
My mother smiled. I didn't remember how long it had been since I had seen that expression from her.
So that's how it is. I see.
She covered her mouth with her hands as if she finally understood something. Then she disappeared without a trace, as if she had never existed in the first place. In her place, an old curved dagger fell to the floor at my mentor's feet. My own cries sounded distant. An indescribable sense of terror and despair invaded my brain. I felt like I was a sobbing child, as I kneeled where my mother had just disappeared. Where is she?
This is her corpse, although the two can coexist before the original is identified. Once that happens, the copy created by the simulation must disappear, like a doppelganger. Oh, right, Father Fernando probably also died of the same reason.
I could not understand what my mentor was saying at all. However, my heart had been throbbing violently in my chest ever since the Husk King was unmasked, as if it was trying to tell me something. El-Melloi, ye old one of the villagers, the old woman who was their leader. What have you done? Her howls were more like pleas than accusations. Like me, she could not understand what she had just witnessed. However, there was the added weight of more than 1,000 years on the old woman's shoulders. In response to that, my mentor only took out his box of cigars from his pocket. Though the battle had not ended yet, he lit it with a snap and placed it in his mouth. That was not a show of his carelessness. To my mentor, this act must be like a switch, my still fuzzy brain thought, a switch to hide his original personality and to activate the identity of Lord El-Melloi II of the clock tower.
Unfortunately, I didn't do anything. I couldn't have done anything. I just made a guess based on the clues that were here.
My mentor said as he exhaled a puff of smoke. I couldn't help but turn my head at those words. The old woman could not understand what he was trying to say, and she shot back a rhetorical question like a parrot repeating human words. A prediction. Cast by our Taylor Studio, please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening.
You call Grey the body of King Arthur, yes? That means you know that the Husk King is the mind. And even though you clearly understand that you lack the soul, you attempted to merge the two here. However, that ritual has been .t.
Everyone was stunned by the impact of those words. The only people who didn't get affected, or at least didn't seem affected, were Trimo and the Bone Soldiers, who didn't have the ability to feel that way, and the Knight, whose expression was impossible to discern. Everyone else held their breaths, like suspects listening to a detective's deduction. Nobody dared to take even a single breath. That was how impactful the face behind the mask and my mentor's words were.
Pained, you're saying that the ritual has been distorted.
Perhaps she had devoted her entire life to this ritual. It wasn't just her, either. Everyone else related to the old woman had poured precious hours and days of their life into this. Their persistence, passions, longings, history, traditions, and dreams had all been discarded for the sake of this ritual.
Originally, the Husk King shouldn't have had a face. The mind of the king alone cannot materialize completely, much like Sir Kay.
So it was inevitable that the knight's face would be hazy. The knight listened silently to my mentor's words, not confirming nor refuting any of his claims.
That reason the village needs a ritual to unite the three parts of a person, especially a mystic code or spell to remove Grey's mind and soul from her body.
My mentor picked up the dagger. Was this the mystic code?
Analytical, my mentor narrowed his eyes and examined it briefly before he continued. However, someone interfered with this step. Let's assume that that person is a he. This person is a mage with a detailed understanding of the three elements of a human being and has been watching this village for a long time.
There was no need to ask who he was talking about. It was Dr. Heartless. As he was the former head of the Department of Modern Magecraft, Norwich, his knowledge on the subject was guaranteed.
Analytical, he also induced one of the villagers.
The strange noise sounded again. It was now noticeably louder and more frequent. However, the people around us still took no notice of it. To what point would these irregularities continue? No, perhaps they wouldn't stop until they covered this entire world. Sir, the noise keeps spreading.
Strained, the answer is right there.
Worried, I heard the strain in his voice. A drop of sweat trickled down the side of his face. He probably didn't have a positive outlook on the situation either. In fact, I think that he simply betted everything on this. Find the mystery that you must solve. That is the only way you can reach the end, Lord El-Melloi II. It was the mystery that Sepia had given us. I didn't know why I was so sure of it, but I knew that was what my mentor was attempting to solve.
Analytical, it was necessary for him to have an accomplice, because even for someone like him, dodging the Magecraft alarm system completely would be difficult. So you could say that it was only natural for him to look for an accomplice in the village.
My mentor had said before that Heartless made incidents get buried in darkness. It seemed that he was already used to secretly hiring accomplices.
And that's how he managed to receive hints about the ritual in the village. In turn, the person who provided this information received from him the means to disrupt the resurrection of King Arthur.
Observant hearing my mentor's words, the wrinkles at the old woman's brow deepened.
So you're saying that the accomplice was Magdalena?
Could it be anyone else?
My mentor's assertion caused a vein to rise on the old woman's forehead.
But Magdalena isn't even a mage. Unlike Grey, she's a failure that didn't become King Arthur's body.
How can someone like her do ritual without a bit of assistance from a mage?
Doesn't she have the perfect means to intervene in the form of the central focus of this ritual?
You mean Grey?
Observant, my mentor shifted his gaze from the furious old woman to me.
Questioning. Grey, you were there when I said that it wasn't just manipulating magical energy and casting spells. Everything from eating, sleeping, and even excretion is closely related to magecraft and mystery, right?
I remembered. It was when we were at the Twin Towers of Ilsema. I had also thought of myself back then. After my father's death, my mother had started managing my life more fervently than ever. Not only for sleep and prayer, but also even the order in which I ate my food, or how I put on my clothes. Naturally, my attitude towards my surroundings was influenced by her. My mentor had said before that this was also a type of spell, transforming the macrocosmos of the world by making it mirror changes in the microcosmos of life. This was undoubtedly a type of magecraft. Guiding the tidal currents of the earth and the movement of the stars into the tiny vessel of a human body was a way to make greater mystery possible.
Analytical, there should have been something close to the potential to become King Arthur in your mother. It's only natural for that to be the case. She is your mother, after all. On top of that, the village has been cultivating this potential for quite a while. That is to say, this village is under the influence of magecraft that could cause these potentials to awaken. Therefore, the means of intervention that he taught her were very simple. By synchronizing the wavelength of the person with the highest affinity to the ritual and the wavelength of your mother, you can create a path to directly intervene into the spell.
Synchronize with me?
Analytical, exactly. Your mother subtly shifted her wavelength to be in tune with yours through eating, sleeping, and everything else in your life.
It was probably something similar to what Flat did. Magecraft intervention. From a technical point of view, this might be even more sophisticated.
Balanalytical, though the means itself is straightforward, in practice, it is not that easy to pull off. It's actually a difficult act that requires so much perseverance that even a real mage would complain about it. Not a single detail can be overlooked in order to completely synchronize the wavelength of her mutated daughter to her own. If we use food as an example, the difference of a couple of grams would affect the accuracy of the spell, and even the amount of bites taken would need to be managed. Imagine that, but for every hour of every day. It would require a stunning amount of energy to be able to do this without being able to ask the other person for help.
Pained my body shook. My mentor's words were only processed by my ears. My brain had not managed to comprehend the meaning behind it at all. However, I could not help but realize that this was the truth. Every feeling that I had once held for my mother reversed along with a feeling of pain as intense as if my skin was being peeled off.
However, she succeeded. She somehow managed to succeed. The next step was to follow what Heartless had written down on the evidence board. Though the spell was complicated, it wouldn't be difficult to perform as long as she had synchronized herself well. What happened then was that two sets of parameters were inserted into the unstable mind of King Arthur. One was the parameters of the mind, and the other were those of your mother. Though it seemed like King Arthur on the surface, something similar to your mother's parameters were hiding deep within. The Husk King herself probably never realized it until the end.
Was that the reason why Heartless had approached the village before he left?
Questioning, my mentor raised the ancient dagger that he had just picked up. Is this dagger the mystic code used in the ritual?
Indeed. This is a mystic code capable of separating the soul and the mind from the body, called arrows.
Analytical, if that's the case, the answer is simple. During the first cycle, Magdalena arrived here early and took the place of her daughter, stabbing the dagger into her own body. Then, the unstable mind of King Arthur was forcibly dragged into that soulless, mindless body. However, Magdalena first stabbed herself with a regular dagger. Even King Arthur wouldn't be able to do anything against being placed into a dead body. She had to die.
Worried, the old woman could not finish her sentence. I didn't know how much the other villagers knew, but they still panicked with the old woman. They couldn't understand what the first cycle or the second cycle meant, so I guess it was inevitable that they acted this way. No, actually, I could no longer discern their expressions anymore. The sound of the burning world had already reached the level of a din. It wasn't just that. The cracks that had appeared on the swamp and the temple had spread to the villagers.
Yes? Urgent Gray? You can feel this noise, yes?
Yes.
Analytical, in the words of that director of the Atlas Institute, the stage has discovered a contradiction. If the stage cannot hold against it, the reenactment loses its meaning. If the foundations collapse, we must start from the beginning. Therefore, we need to arrive here before it collapses. This reenactment really is beautifully made. Even I have doubted countless times that this was actually the past. However, that is not the case. Since this place is not the past, there must be things that cannot be concealed. In this case, that would be death.
Death cannot be concealed. During the first cycle, Father Fernando had died. The Husk King, or perhaps I should say, my mother, who gave her body to her, also died. Only the truth of that timeline could not be concealed in this reenactment, no matter what. That was why Father Fernando's body would suddenly appear, and why the Husk King would die in my mother's body. Perhaps, before their death, both of them had seen their own doppelgangers.
Well then, to conclude, like I just said, in the real world there is no way for the mind to retain its shape for a long period of time. Sir Kay can only materialize because of Ad, his true form. Even so, there is no guarantee that he can sustain it for longer than a day. However, for the Husk King, she awoke at the same time Grey had begun her transformation. That is to say, 10 years ago.
My mentor paused briefly before looking to the side.
Confrontational. Well then, how do you maintain your own existence?
Oh.
What's going on?
I didn't know when, but the corpse of the Husk King, or rather, what was once the Husk King, had stood up. Was this still the same Husk King as before? I could not sense a trace of life in her as she stood there quietly with her head hung. Though her face was the same as my mother's, she gave me the feeling of an entirely different being. The victim who was thought to have been killed but turned out to still be alive. Though this happened quite frequently in mystery novels, this was different.
Hasdonatical Husk King, no. That's not the right name to use anymore. After your reboot, you are neither Magdalena nor the mind of King Arthur, but something that consumed large amounts of mana to continue calculating.
One of the 7 superweapons of the Atlas Institute, the knight Sir Kay, who had inherited Ad's memories, did not expect that name to appear here either, and did not make an effort to hide his shock.
So you're saying that the Atlas Institute's superweapon is a person?
Analytical. Not exactly. To be precise, she is the avatar of Logos React in this world. I see. Since it's the super weapon of the Atlas Institute, it should be able to duplicate the mind of King Arthur. Such a task should probably be completable, even if it only had the excess energy outside its original functions. After all, those super weapons were created to save humanity from destruction, but are also capable of destroying the world.
The object that was once the Husk King did not speak. I didn't know when it had happened, but her face had become as hazy as Sir Kay's. Was that the face of the mind of King Arthur, or that of the incarnation of Logos React?
Analytical, indeed. This is not the past, or a time loop. Therefore, the Husk King's death can only happen at a fixed time. The answer to this endless loop that begins and ends with death is already clear. Proclaiming this place as a grave, a tiny world after death constructed by Logos React.
His declaration echoed in the temple. I could not understand the meaning behind what he said at all. Instead, as if in response to his words, the noise grew louder. I felt like my eardrums were going to burst. Everything in my field of vision was being torn apart. Every inch of the swamp, the temple, and the villagers looked like a badly scarred photo. If I inserted my fingers into those cracks, would it kill everything?
Shouting, you heard that, right? You heard me, Atlas. The mystery has been solved. Summer is over. Show yourself, Sepia Eltnum Atlasia.
In an instant, everything disappeared. The swamp, the temple, the Black Madonna, the old woman, the villages, Bazak and Illumia. And then, in a way that was fitting for the dawn in a certain sense, a veil of darkness had been lifted. That man stood there, naturally, as if he had been waiting for this moment. It was a strange space. There was nothing else apart from the large number of crystal balls floating in the air. In the darkness I reached down and felt the floor, which had a texture unlike that of dirt, metal, or resin. I forced down the uneasiness that came from everything in my line of sight suddenly changing, and heard the crisp sound of applause.
Congratulations on reaching the truth, Lord El-Melloi II.
The man stood there with his eyes closed, Rather than saying that his age was difficult to discern, it was more like he was an organism that had already transcended that concept. No, it wasn't even right to call him an organism. They were called dead apostles precisely for that reason, as they had deviated from everything that living organisms would do. Apostles of death. That is what you must destroy. That, and only that. Did what Bisak had said to me when I was still a gravekeeper apply here? Could dead apostles and spirits be regarded the same way? Everything around us had disappeared, from the temple that had risen from below the ground to the dead Husk King, Berzig, Illumia, Trimmau, the villagers, and my mother. No, they had not completely disappeared. All the things I just described were now shown in the floating crystal balls. Each crystal ball of the large number in the room showed the place we had just been in from a different angle. Everyone was completely frozen in place. This abnormal scene made me feel like everything I had experienced up to now was only a scene from a movie.
I've also been dragged here. I guess that's inevitable since ad's my true form, but don't you think I've worked without pay for too long? Back in the day, I would have earned a piece of land for this. But don't actually give me a piece of land. I won't be able to go around wooing maidens that way.
I relieved a sigh of relief as I realized that the chatterbox of a knight was still here, and tightened my grip on my scythe. And then, there was my mentor. His eyes had not left his opponent, not even for a moment.
Questioning Zeppia Eltnametlatia, was the answer I gave correct?
You could say that. In modern terms, you've passed the level. You interacted with Logos React splendidly, and managed to make the world eject you by solving its riddle. If we ignore the Husk King, whose true form is Logos React, if someone who understands the structure of the world enters the reenactment, it will create a paradox.
So that's why you weren't in that world.
Basically, yes.
Sir, Miss Trimmau.
That Trimmo is just a creation of Logos React, based on the Trimmo that Rains left behind in the first cycle. The real Trimmo is probably pouring tea for Rains right now.
Hearing my mentor's response, I breathed a sigh of relief. If that was the case, what about Bazak and Illumia? When we returned to the village, these people had already disappeared, and like Father Fernando, who had died already in the first cycle, my mother... Just as I was thinking of that, I heard the sound of footsteps.
Professor! Oh!
The two blonde teenagers ran over, shouting in unison. It was Flat and Svin.
I knew you could do it! Flat, that comment wasn't necessary. How could our teacher not succeed? The fact that you even doubted that he would is rude. Even if you didn't mind other people's business, he would have solved it perfectly anyway. Teasing? What do you mean? Weren't you the one who said that we should help him with the expression of a puppy being abandoned in the rain, Lashian-kun? No, it isn't. I'm flustered. That's just me acting on his instructions because he said it's important to have good backup as a mage. Also, how is my expression related at all?
Your students are quite talented. I envy you.
I think so as well.
Everyone was here. My mentor, me, the knight, Sir Kay, the two teenagers. And finally Zeppia.
Well then, as the person who arrived at the answer, what do you seek from me, Lord El-Melloi II? Is it the whereabouts of Heartless? Or the information the Atlas Institute has on the Holy Grail War?
The tone of the director of the Atlas Institute, who had sent us to the second cycle, was unbelievably warm, as if he was congratulating us from the bottom of his heart. However...
No, I haven't arrived at any kind of answer. The mystery that I must solve is still to come. Zeppia Eltnametlatia, ancient king of the Atlas Institute.
Chapter 5. Tilda. Suddenly, I felt as if the air itself had changed fundamentally. I even had a hallucination of sparks flying between Zeppia and my mentor. Anxious, my throat hurts. This intense pain was caused by my anxiety. Though it was rare, my mentor would sometimes have a very belligerent expression. Though he was usually cautious almost to the point of cowardice, in the right situation, his words and actions would become almost provocative. For example, when he was up against the Grand Puppeteer, and also when he confronted the former head of the Department of Modern Magecraft, heartless. Perhaps it was so he could make a risky move to unsettle the enemy and try to figure out what was going on. But this wasn't all. Though he'd probably cite that as the reason if you asked him. There must be something else there. It must be because that was who he originally was. Reckless, imprudent, and passionate. Sometimes, a mage like that would appear uncontrollably in front of my eyes. Though I had never seen what my mentor was like in the past, I could not help but imagine him as he stood alongside that heroic spirit named Iskandar. I suppose that to him that would be his youth. Sepia was silent for a moment before he spoke again.
The mystery is still to come, you say?
Yes, I'm not playing some sort of word game. Since I said that the second cycle was some sort of grave, there must be some meaning behind what I said. If this is a grave, then finding out—
I thought I saw Zepia freeze for a second. Perhaps I was just seeing things.
Analytical as if he had seen an opening, my mentor continued. However, you hastily reminded us of what we were entitled to. Why?
Is it difficult to believe that I would just choose to do so?
You don't do anything that doesn't need to be done. Though what you say might have been difficult for us to understand, that was simply because we did not have the capacity to understand it at the time. Think about it. Why would someone like you stay in this village?
Is that strange?
Analytical, I've always thought so. You've said before that the technology of the Atlas Institute allows someone to hold command over it from anywhere in the world. Also, unlike the other members, you do not need to follow the rules of the Atlas Institute and stay within its gates. However, this alone doesn't constitute enough of a reason for you to stay in this village, especially.
Ah. True. Just because he was capable wasn't a reason why he would do it. Even if one of the 7 superweapons was really hidden in this village, that shouldn't have been a reason why the director would visit here himself. What's more, it had been around half a year since we left the village in the first cycle. I couldn't imagine why he needed to stay here for so long.
Analytical. No, this entire incident is too roundabout. Was it actually you who sent us to that second cycle?
I began to recall what had happened before we were transported to the second cycle. We had returned here in search of clues about Heartless and had met Zepia in the hut outside the empty village. Has it started? One of the superweapons of Atlas is hidden in this village. It's one of the 7 superweapons of the Atlas Institute. Its specialty is reenactment. I suppose I am already quite familiar with it. Though it doesn't have an official name, it is commonly called Logos React. These words were explanations. Thinking back, that was probably the most basic preparation he had planned for us before we entered the second cycle.
You did not activate it yourself. You simply knew that it would happen.
I see.
So if I'm just bringing up what happened in the past, I don't imagine you would admit it. Therefore, please allow me to organize everything that happened during the first cycle. Sir K.
Annoyed, I didn't think that my name would come up in a boring conversation between mages. I would very much like to get out of here right now, but whatever. What do you want from me?
Questioning, I don't think I've misremembered, but just in case, I'd like you to confirm something. You inherited Ad's memories, right?
I guess you could say that. That's why I'm not quite the same as when I was still alive.
Questioning, if that's the case, do you remember what Father Fernando did on the 3rd day of the first cycle after I met Gray?
I remember seeing him sometime in the evening. Then Gray and I, or maybe I should say, Gray and Ad returned home as usual. Later, someone slipped some sedative into her food.
And analytical, if that's the case, then we should assume that the temple rose from the water in the first cycle as well, letting the Husk King and the Bone Soldiers come up to the surface. I presume that Father Fernando was killed during the conflicts then.
Was that where the corpse Bazak saw came from? I suppose Father Fernando had not been as careful as he was during the second cycle. The only reason why they had gone underground and fought with the Husk King in the second cycle was because of our actions. Otherwise, they would only have rushed to the swamp after observing some irregularities. It was impossible that they could have imagined that those monsters would be there. It wouldn't be surprising if they were killed by the bone soldiers that they could have dealt with if they were prepared.
And analytical, since Sister El-Melloi's corpse wasn't discovered around that area, that means she probably survived the clash. However, either way, she wasn't able to stop the village.
My mentor had not noticed it back then, but the reason why the church noticed the irregularity was not just because my mentor wasn't very good at perceiving these things, but also because they had made preparations long ago. They were sent here to monitor the village after all, so they might even have installed devices especially for this purpose.
Analytical, everything else went exactly like I said. Before she became the body of the mind of King Arthur, Grey's mother killed herself and died along with the Husk King. She probably arrived there just before the villagers did, hid Grey somewhere, put on the mask, and carried out her plan. I just don't know if it's the mask that belonged to the Husk King or a copy of it that she prepared.
The villagers and the old woman who worshipped King Arthur never even thought to take off the mask.
Analytical, before it happened, your mother probably explained part of the situation to Berzak so he could find you successfully and take you away. Though, looking at the situation, Berzak probably wasn't aware of the details. She might have just asked him to save Grey for her.
And that was how Berzak ended up entrusting me to my mentor. Everyone already knows what happened after that. After I came to London, I gradually managed to pull myself together and experienced a multitude of cases with my mentor and the students of the El-Melloi classroom. Mother, pained there was a weight on my chest. The feeling of having everything I knew get completely overturned that I had felt when I had heard that my mother was the culprit surged back, and I felt like my heart was being set on fire. Why? Why do it? Why would something like that happen? Did she throw away her own life for nothing? Wasn't she one of the villagers who fervently looked forward to the resurrection of King Arthur?
Isn't it obvious? It's because she loves you, Grey.
Of course. What my mentor talked about was something that I should have never been able to obtain. No, that wasn't true. I knew what it was, once, before my face had become this one. Back then, the world had been bright, and the stars had shone. We had laughed together countless times in the beautiful song of the birds. Why had I forgotten all of this? No matter how many times I tried to deny it, these things would never disappear from my heart. And even if I did, my mother would never forget it. She wouldn't forget a single second. I should be the one who understands my mother the most. And
Your mother cannot reveal this matter to anyone, not even you. Therefore, your mother pretended to be the most fanatical worshipper out of all the others in the village. If she didn't do that, she wouldn't have gotten the mystic code used to separate the body from the mind and the soul. That is why she needed to put on an act so convincing that the old woman wouldn't have even a moment of doubt.
It must have been such a tedious task. How much determination must the task have taken? What kind of persistence must she have had to endure for such a long time? Even now, I could not imagine how those years must have felt.
That is why we must know the reason.
My mentor's voice was not gentle. It was impossible for someone's voice to be gentle when they were revealing the cruel truth. When someone is forcing someone else to confess, it is inevitable that their voice would be harsh, just like what my mentor was doing now.
Otherwise, we would miss something more important than that. The same applies to you too, Zephia.
He turned to look at the alchemist of the Atlas Institute again.
You're saying that I have a similar reason. Well then, what would that reason be?
Confident, could it be anything else other than the contract of Atlas?
I could feel Sven stiffen behind me. As an honor student, he had probably heard of it before, or perhaps Zephia had brought it up. I recalled the conversation that I had witnessed between Zephia and my mentor. Are you referring to the 7 contracts that are said to be scattered around the world? Yes, the 7 contracts. The Atlas Institute is obliged to assist anyone who activates them.
7 contracts of the Atlas Institute. You've mentioned it before, right? If someone activates them, the Atlas Institute has to come to their aid. And the reason why you decided to do something so roundabout and ineffective can only be so you wouldn't go against the contract.
To not go against the contract.
Analytical, if the contents of the contract matched what you wanted to do, you would use the opposite of a roundabout approach. If you simply wanted to drive us away, it wouldn't be difficult at all considering the abilities of the Atlas Institute. And yet you didn't, which means that you do not wish to become our enemy, but cannot help us either. Yes. Therefore, after calculating countless results, you managed to induce our actions to just happen to coincide with your goals.
That can hardly be called deductive reasoning. Speculating on the basis of guesses is hardly ever a good idea. It will influence the quality of the script, you know.
Sorry for that, but I'm not a detective. However, this time, I do have a piece of evidence.
Evidence?
Confident. I brought it up earlier. The evidence is who the grave belongs to.
Once again, my mentor returned the conversation to the original topic. I didn't know if he was doing it on purpose, but managing to suddenly turn the focus back to something after going off in a completely different direction was one of my mentor's talents.
Analytical, the answer to that question is obvious, too. If you think of whose death the noise started appearing around, everything becomes clear. That is the grave of the Husk King, and the grave of Grey's mother, but also the grave of Logos React. Of course, Logos React cannot die. An item is an item. It does not have life, and though there are religious customs related to animism all over the world, such as tales of how they would burn objects to stop them from becoming evil spirits, but those don't apply here. Analytical, it was Logos React that recreated the mind of King Arthur. Even if Grey's mother combined herself with the Husk King, this is still true. And then the death of the Husk King sent Logos React a different set of data, that is to say, Logos React, which can never die, was given the information of death.
Death, given to something without an understanding of the concept. Was what happened here really such a bizarre phenomenon?
Analytical, however, because it is an item. Logos React did not die. It died, and yet it is not dead. This paradox caused an immeasurable load on that weapon. Though its computational capacity seems infinite to most people, even it could not explain and solve this paradox. And what happens next? It is said that each of the 7 superweapons of the Atlas Institute is capable of destroying humanity. So what would happen if Logos React malfunctioned?
I blinked. I could not imagine this at all. However, for a mage, it seemed to be something important, as even Flat let out an exclamation, as if he had come across an unexpectedly good game, and then covered his mouth with his hands. Only the knight, Sir Kay, remained unaffected, and he yawned impatiently. No, actually, I had some kind of idea. Is that why all the people disappeared when we came back to the village?
Yes, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say that they were all pulled into the malfunctioning Logos React.
Hearing my mentor's response, I swallowed. A malfunctioning weapon that was said to be capable of destroying the world. If it really could, wouldn't we have been lucky that it only affected a single village?
And that's why you have continued to watch over this village alone.
Huh?
Analytical, perhaps you have kept watch here alone guarding the world. At least I think so. Because before you, this person named Zepia was an alchemist or a powerful dead apostle. You were the director of the Atlas Institute. So, what say you? Since I've already revealed it to this point, it wouldn't go against the contract to admit to it, would it?
Not bad, Lord El-Melloi II. You really are an interesting person. As you have guessed, the Atlas Institute lent Logos React out to someone based on the contract. Before the resurrection of King Arthur is successfully achieved or definitively declared a failure, you could only watch. That is why it malfunctioned.
Ah, this was also a wide unit. It was why he had no other choice. Why he had to stay here, alone in this village. It was the only possible result of the chain of events. However, it was still strange. There were still parts that had not been explained. Why do you have to do this? The contract didn't mention anything about having to continue surveilling Logos React, right?
Didn't your teacher say it just then? Because this is the obligation of the Atlas Institute. We have given ourselves the task of guarding over the human race, so that they can continue inhabiting this world far into the future. That is what millennia of our Institute's alchemists have dedicated their lives to.
Sepia's words were full of sincerity. Though the Atlas Institute and the Clock Tower were both associations of mages, they were vastly different. The Clock Tower was a place infinitely dedicated to personal gain, while the Atlas Institute had completely abandoned all individual desires. Which was a more correct path for a person to take, I wonder? At the same time, the decisions that he made based on the contract, which seemed more like that of a machine than a person, gave me an uneasy feeling.
Analytical in this situation. We can only take action once we have judged that the contract cannot be fulfilled. In order for that to happen, let's see, more than half of Wales would have to be involved in this disaster for the criteria to be met. I am here to be the first to witness that moment.
I am easy. Like before, his decisions did not contain a single bit of emotion. It was as if he was a cold, lifeless void, structured in the shape of a person.
And you saying that we should destroy Logos React?
No, I never said that. According to the contract, I don't have the authority to say that. I am merely confirming your speculations, Lord. The destruction of half of Wales is of little consequence to me. Such a degree of disruption would activate neither Gaia nor Leia.
At this, Sepia stopped speaking and looked up at the sky. Though I said that, there wasn't a sky in this space. There was only a hazy canopy of ivory. Huh. Though the sound it made was different to the one from before, it was also similar. But why would this sound appear in a place that wasn't the second cycle?
My apologies, but I must warn you. It seems that the malfunctioning Logos React is trying to intervene to cross over here from the other side.
Questioning from the other side?
Analytical. That is still unknown territory, and it has never done anything this drastic until now. I suppose she, or whatever you want to call it now, is a little more committed about this than I expected. Perhaps it's because of the fusion with the Husk King. If you think you're just being messed with by an obnoxious scriptwriter for the sake of the audience's entertainment, you're free to leave. You've already solved the mystery after all, and I will open the gates for you to leave. Well, like I said, go and demonstrate the knowledge which you are so obsessed with. I can buy enough time for us to not get caught up in its malfunction, and the damage won't spread all the way to London where the clock tower is.
Questioning? What about the other option?
What do you mean?
My mentor narrowed his eyes slightly at Sepia, who had paused for a beat before he asked that question.
Analytical? Would it go against the contract? I thought so. If you told us that such an option was possible, it wouldn't be a coincidence but a straightforward invitation for us to deal with Logos React. But since you haven't said no, that means that it's not completely impossible.
Observant. My mentor turned to look at me.
Gray, in the second cycle I said that this was your case, so the decision is in your hands.
Yes.
Though I've said all that, Bluster, for my own selfish reasons, I want to see this case to the end. This is the wrong choice to make, both as a mage and as the Lord of the El-Melloi faction. However, I can't ignore this issue, no matter what.
Silent. Why? Why would I feel so ashamed at such a critical moment?
Sincere, I can't tell you, but I hope you can entrust me with your life.
You really are an idiot, sir. Please don't say something like that with a look of guilt on your face. I couldn't help but smile, My brain still had not fully processed anything, from my mother's motive to Logos React, and to half of Wales being in danger. I wasn't about to recover from such an impact any time soon, but the obvious answer to that question slipped out of my mouth without a moment of hesitation. Sincere, didn't I entrust my life to you a long time ago? Hearing my response, the knight put a hand to his hazy face, as if he was letting out a silent exclamation of surprise. Just as he seemed to want to say something, a voice came from behind me.
Excited? Now's not the time to retreat, Professor. We haven't passed the level yet. Come on! It's not every day you have a hidden boss fight, so how can we just walk away?
I plan on going along with what Sir and Greytan, Miss Grey decide on doing. Also, I've been asked to help out with my strength. It would go against the contract to not use what you've lent properly.
Hearing that, the knight, Sir Kay, finally protested loudly.
Oi, are you people stupid? Have you crushed and boiled your brains and dunked them in Giant's liquor? He just told you that you could leave, so why the heck do you still want to get into more trouble? Especially after all that. I'm not some girl who pulled a sword out of a rock even though she had the choice not to, and I certainly don't plan on running off to hell like an idiot.
But you'll still accompany us there, right, Sir Kay? Hearing this, a low groan escaped from the knight's mouth.
Why would you think so? You might as well say that. Because you're holding my true form, I can't escape at all, even if I wanted to. If you feel sorry for me, hurry up and get out of here. But that's never gonna happen, huh?
Seeing my nod, the knight's head drooped in disappointment. My mentor spoke to Zepia again after confirming this.
Questioning, is it fine with you if we help you stop the malfunctioning Logos React?
Are you serious?
Confident. Of course I am. Besides that, you've already calculated that answer, haven't you?
Analytical. Naturally. The possibility isn't high, but it is good enough to be a candidate for a choice that you could make. Everything you have done up to this point points to this answer. That is why I chose to make contact with you at the risk of violating the contract. However, I still don't understand.
Observant alchemist of the Atlas Institute shook his head for the first time.
Why does such an option exist? With your level of intelligence, you should understand how unreasonable this is, and how dangerous Logos React is. You're going to say some ridiculous line about how this is for the sake of Wales, are you? Or is it because of that other option you mentioned? Even if it really exists, it only does on a purely theoretical level. As a lord, do you really want to risk your life for such an unreasonable choice? It's not only your own life, but also the lives of your student and your disciple, as far as I know. Isn't it in your nature to avoid involving students in your own battles?
As I said earlier, I'm not a detective. I don't believe that you can find the truth by eliminating all of the illogicalities, because I am a mage. And I've already grown tired of always picking the best solution.
The air was full of surprise, but only briefly. Hearing his response, the alchemist began to laugh.
You don't plan on eliminating the illogicalities, you say? Are you a madman? A fool? An imbecile? I was wondering what you would say. I never thought it would be something so stupid and meaningless. What do you plan on doing, abandoning the optimal solution? As a creature that can live at least 300 years even without the use of magecraft. And you're planning to face the malfunctioning Logos React with this kind of puny reasoning and pathetic physical strength?
He sounded like he found it laughable from the bottom of his heart. The space began to crack apart, like the temple had, and the jeering laughter of the alchemist kept on echoing and echoing until he came to his conclusion.
Realization, I see. That way everything makes sense.
What the hell does that mean?
Yes. Is that the case? How ridiculous. How boring. That is why I have abandoned these thoughts, and why I have stopped worrying. And you plan on continuing advancing with these thoughts. I see. How boring. I see. How? No. I have already chosen to watch from the side, so it would be unfitting for me to continue. Let's get back to our main topic. You are free to stop Logos react, but just as Lord El-Melloi II deduced, as per the contract, I cannot assist you. However, I am allowed to adjust the stage. Though it might not give you an advantage, it might help you relax somewhat.
Grateful thank you for your help.
Zepia raised his hands and traced an arc in the sky.
The time for the curtain to fall has come. Oh, yes. One more thing. Since you have already decided on involving yourself, I don't think telling you this would violate the contract. Your guess is correct, Lord El-Melloi II. The deaths of Gray's mother and father, Fernando, have not been determined yet.
Oh, pa! Shocked, the shock was so great I felt as if it passed straight through me, as a silent voice sounded in my head. Oh, code. Logos react, unauthorized activation. Dash distortion value, B dash extracted time period. Hash 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 dash on Logos program. Activated, began replacing targets. Dash full process. Clear. Atlas Institute Human Order Extension Experiment Number 5. Starting. After the mages of the clock tower disappeared, Zepia sighed. Even if it was just for a second, he needed to slow down the loss of control caused by the malfunction. Even though the contract forbade him from directly taking action against Logos React, he was still allowed to indirectly prompt someone like Lord El-Melloi II. Of course, his sixth parallel mind was telling him that there was a danger that he was still violating the contract, but the second and the third had more priority, and they claimed that this was within the regulations. The contradictions between his thoughts caused his functions to decrease by a couple of percentage points, but there was nothing he could do about it. In the past 6 months, Zepia had continuously touched these crystal balls, manipulating nearly countless parameters. In a certain sense, this was a technique more delicate than the intervention that Flat used. Even if it was another alchemist of the Atlas Institute, anyone other than him would have their brains instantly burned out by the load. If he wasn't able to take such a load, though, it would have been meaningless for him to become a dead apostle. He moved his fingers like usual, standing alone in that space.
Is that the case? How ridiculous. How boring.
The words flowed forth from his lips like the lyrics to a song. Those were the same things he had mocked Lord El-Melloi II's lines with. However, this time, he continued, as if for the first time in decades, he reunited with his first love, whose face he had already forgotten.
Whistle. I see. How cute.
I felt the wind caress my face. This was neither not the summer of the second cycle, nor the winter in real life. The sky was overcast. Several stone pillars had been erected on the ground around us. Each one had a name carved into it, and they stood there like abandoned children, casting their sparse shadows onto the dark earth. Though it was a lot larger than the one in the village, the stagnation of the air and the damp smell of the dirt were familiar to me. It was a graveyard. Was this the place that Zepia had chosen for us? The grave of my mother, the Husk King, and Logos React? However, what occupied my brain now was not the environment. Shouting, "Sir!" What did he mean when he said that the deaths of my mother and father Fernando had not been determined yet?
I was still in the hypothesis stage about this, but I didn't want to let you down if it didn't end up being true. The Atlas Institute really ended up giving us something unexpected. Like you said, your mother's death has not been determined yet.
What does that mean?
Analytical, because Logos React is still attempting to verify the deaths. The deaths of the people who died then have not been determined. They're probably still being kept in a deep sleep resembling death somewhere inside Logos React, along with the rest of the villagers. Though I've had my doubts about Father Fernando, I never thought that Zeppia himself would confirm it.
A strange feeling rose up in me. I hadn't talked that much with Father Fernando, but I did get a strange feeling of relief when I interacted with him, simply because he saw me as myself, and not the body of King Arthur. Hopeful, so that's why they haven't been determined, the deaths of both my mother and Father Fernando.
Huh, so that's what it is. Mages really do the strangest things. It is pretty interesting, though. So what do you plan on doing next? Can you fix whatever piece of crap that Logos React is? Actually, you probably have no chance with that kind of skill level. So it'll be up to your students?
Determined we're doing neither. I suppose it's for this that I managed to bring this back from the second cycle.
Observant, my mentor said, as he took out a curved dagger. It was erosion. The ancient mystic code that had separated my mother's body from her mind and her soul.
Analytical, this place has to be part of Logos Rack's calculations, so people can bring their belongings with them. I plan on using this mystic code to separate the mind of the dead Husk King from Logos Racked.
Worried I was momentarily rendered speechless. Indeed, it could work. After all, erosion was made for this exact purpose. Theoretically, as soon as the Husk King's mind was removed from Logos React, it should return to normal. However, it was only theoretical. I didn't know if it could actually be fixed. Even if you removed an arrow from a wounded animal, it wouldn't recover completely. At most, it would just increase its chances of survival. What if? That won't be enough to fix it.
Determined then, our only choice is to destroy it.
Hearing that determined voice, I could not help but swallow. Either way, it would be an incredibly difficult task. We might not be able to keep our own lives, much less the lives of my mother and Father Fernando. The woman with a metal mask appeared in the center of the graveyard, a couple dozen meters away from us.
Logos React.
It feels so much like a dream.
The woman removed her mask. She no longer looked like my mother. She didn't look like me either. Her face was hazy, like the night, Sir Kay's. I suppose that was what she originally looked like.
Yes, this is the original me.
It was completely different. This was completely different from the Husk King that we had met in the summer of the reenactment, which felt like less than an hour ago.
Yes, I am the mind of King Arthur, the weapon forged by the Atlas Institute.
As if she finally realized something, the woman raised her right hand. Darkness began to gather there and took on a form.
Yes, this lance is both Rong Gominiad and Logos React.
Annoyed, hey, that's enough crap, don't you think?
If I had been a regular person with no idea of what was happening, just this cyclone of magical energy alone would be enough to cause me to pass out. And it wasn't just that. Something had begun to form beside Logos React. In a similar way, the lance had appeared. After a few seconds, the darkness became two familiar figures. Mr. Berzer.
And Sister Illumia?
Intense animosity radiated off of the two people.
Analytical, I see, so the Logos React is able to recreate the people it absorbed. That meant that everything from people to items could be reconstructed through Logos React's will. If that's the case, Trima and Zeppia won't be able to get reconstructed. I guess we should count ourselves lucky.
Worried I couldn't bring myself to listen to what he was saying anymore.
Gray. I'm still myself.
From what he said to his slight nod, was exactly as usual, however, I could not let down my guard at all.
You know, right? When I was reconstructed, my thought parameters were changed. No matter what I try to do, all I can think of now is killing you.
Mr. Bazak, The gravekeeper smiled a troubled smile as he looked at me.
Do whatever you have to. I'm just a reconstructed replica of Berzak Blackmore.
Pained, he swung his axe towards me. The impact of my scythe blocking his stride spread throughout my entire body. I only realized then exactly how much he had been holding back in the hundreds of times we had fought as part of my training.
So... All right. Let me see what you're capable of.
With a roar, the spirit raven in Bezak's hand flew into the air, and I was gradually dragged into the fight. Similarly, Sister Illumia was facing off against the knight, Sir Kay.
You're the same kind of thing, huh? I don't enjoy committing acts of violence against women much, though.
Absolutely love beating up in me. You can't help but feel a bit vexed if I'm up against a cute girl, but that comes with its own joys. No matter how many times I see a face that's to my liking twist, I'll never get bored of it.
Her gauntlets cracked with purple electricity. The battle-hardened executor looked even more stunning in the mysterious light.
Durante a ausência do morador, based on the night, including how you are a mental model, based on a night from a long time ago, and why you were originally created.
It was impossible to sense a trace of movement from her before she struck. The knight barely managed to dodge Illumia's punch. Did that nun have the advantage in terms of physical ability? Though the knight had received a physical form through Ad, his spirit origin was not stable, and he could not do much more than a regular person. What he could achieve now was probably very different from what he could do as a summoned servant. He was more accustomed to using the power of that lance to fight the Husk King. It was much harder for him to swindle his opponent when he was up against someone with Sister Illumia's speed. Thus, he was trapped in this battle which was difficult for him to win.
All right, let me see how a knight fights. Come on, and let me show you the power of the Lord's teachings.
The nun said as she laughed, letting arcs of electricity shoot toward the knight. The knight dodged the attacks and pulled out his sword, resigned. At the same time, a large number of silhouettes appeared beside the stone pillars. Their bodies were made of crystal. They had all used to be villagers, but they had been turned into chunks of human-shaped crystal and stripped of their will. Perhaps it was easier to have them fight like this, since they were not trained for battle. They rushed forward like a group of zombies.
Oh, ho-ho! I don't need this place to be as crowded as a shopping center, too.
Energetic, Flat said, drawing a pattern in the air with his fingers. Spikes of ice formed and clasped onto the ankles of the horde. This was the best way to show off this teenager's skills, other than intervention, and he puffed up his chest and winked.
The El-Melloi classroom? What do you think, Lucian Cohen?
His classmate, Sveen, said as he gathered his old. The magical energy solidified into an invisible wolf-shaped shell that enveloped his body. He unleashed the energy from his throat and used his magecraft reinforced roar to knock down the remaining crystal people.
No, it's not over yet. Don't let down your guard yet.
A new wave of crystal warriors had appeared beside the stone pillars. This time they were equipped with swords and shields, and looked completely different. They also had skulls for heads.
The bone soldiers.
Since the villagers had been recreated, there wasn't any reason why the same couldn't be done for the bone soldiers. The result of the battle had not been determined just yet. At first glance it looked like a draw. Though Bersak and Illumia were faring slightly better, the rest of the enemies had all been defeated by Flat and Zin, though they had taken some countermeasures. Flat was still more than equal to the task. With my mentor's guidance, nothing seemed to be going wrong. However, after I chased off the spirit raven and distanced myself from Bezak, I heard the voice of Logos react.
I don't understand.
The woman said, as she began to transform into something else, becoming hazier and hazier until she became something that no longer resembled a person.
Why am I here? Why can I not let this be? Why did I even release the independent elements inside me? Why can I not understand this? A re-examination. Yes, I need to re-examine this. The mind of King Arthur must be preserved according to the contract. For the purpose of re-examination, partial parameters will be returned to their original value. Original parameters from T.R. Erherms received. Confirmation from the director received. Information on the scope and migrations of humanity received. Preservation of the human order confirmed. Testing possibilities in parallel universes with similar conditions. 3 seconds until the end of the test. 2 seconds. 1 second. Complete. According to the results, I should continue. I should perform a test for all the possibilities in this limited environment. Yes, this closed-off microcosmos is the doorway to the infinite macrocosmos.
She answered her own question. Or, perhaps I should say, she spoke like someone calculating an equation.
I must protect this. I must arrive there. I must save it. I must prevent its destruction with all of my ability.
Save? My mentor had said something similar when we were at the temple. The 7 superweapons of the Atlas Institute were created to save humanity from destruction. However, instead of saving humanity, the power within each would only end up bringing about the apocalypse again. It was a paradox where the goal contradicted the means. A fragment of a dream that resulted from being fixated on an unreachable goal. Perhaps my village was like that too. They wanted to resurrect the fallen King Arthur. They had started out respecting the king and wanted to see her alive again. Resurrecting her was just the means they chose to use. However, for the later generations, reviving the king became the goal itself. Though grandmother had no idea why she wanted the king to be revived, she had made it the singular goal of her life. Everyone was susceptible to making this kind of mistake. I was lost in this thought for a while before I snapped out of it when I felt the magical energy around me converge around the lance of Logos React. It was...
And Avilito, I defined this period of time that delayed my progress in saving humanity to be a bug, requesting for calculations to become more efficient and for permission to raise maximum energy output to 8%. Permission received.
If she decided to release the true name of the Dark Rongomaniad, it would all be over. There was nothing we could do about it. No one else knew the true power of that noble phantasm better than I did.
Do you think you have time to look away, Grey?
Bazak was approaching. As he did, the spirit raven flew into the air and blocked my path. I had never seen this combination before. It was too nimble to dodge and too powerful to block. I didn't have a single way to go up against this kind of attack. However... I lunged forward toward Bazak's axe. The rim of my hood was sliced apart. If I had been even slightly off, my carotid artery would have probably been torn. I stood up immediately and rushed toward not Bazak, but Sister Illumia.
Huh?
Shouting, sir, Kay. Before I even spoke, the experienced knight understood what I wanted to do. He came around behind me and blocked Bazak's axe, as I swung my scythe and deflected Illumia's attack. I had swapped places with the knight. Since the knight wasn't used to dealing with Illumia's speed, I would use my scythe to force her back. That was what I planned on doing. Perhaps because she had been so focused on the knight, Illumia hesitated for a second, and with that, my scythe shattered her gauntlets. Next to me, the knight, Sir Kay, parried Bazak's axe and pushed me forward with his other hand.
Shouting, "Go, Gray!"
I strengthened myself to the limit of my capabilities and leaped upward. I had jumped more than 10 meters into the air. I needed to get to Logos React.
Shouting. Flat.
Confident yes, Professor.
Behind me, the teenager drew a pattern in the air. For a moment, Logos React froze. He was powerful enough to interfere with even the Atlas Institute's technology. I gave all I had at that moment, and swung my scythe as hard as I could. The nearly complete scythe had deflected my scythe.
Ah, moaning. It cannot be deciphered. I thought so.
The act of simply raising her lance against Flat's restraints had made her completely lose her balance. In my eyes, she was covered in weak points.
Why can I not ignore you? I serve only my own goals. And yet, why have I chased you to this point?
There wasn't a trace of emotion in her words. Though it seemed like a question, did she really find it surprising? Either way, I still told her what I thought. It's sincere, that's because the Husk King's inside you. Even now, her being was the same as mine, one of the 3 essential elements of a person. Since that was the case, I was probably a defective creation. I had been made for the resurrection of King Arthur, but I had not managed to fulfill my purpose. In the end, I had managed to escape thanks to my mother's sacrifice, and now I was foolishly trying to stop the root of this issue, Logos React. I didn't want to escape anymore. I still had not fully wrapped my head around the matter of my mother. However, I still wanted to face it as best as I could.
Questioning why are you standing in my way?
I'm sorry. Pained, I strengthened my arms with all my might. There was plenty of magical energy in the environment. The air was full of the mana from the lance. Therefore I continued to cycle the energy until my magic circuits began to burn from the strain. You didn't do anything wrong. You were just acting based on the contract of Atlas, which told you to imitate the mind of King Arthur to the best of your ability, but you ended up malfunctioning as a result. We only care about ourselves. Sometimes we give you commands. Other times, we try to stop you. And now, we're preparing to destroy you. I didn't know why, but I felt my eyes moisten. What stood in front of me was neither the mind of King Arthur, my mother, nor the real Logos React. She was an amalgam of the 3. However, at the same time, I felt that she was also myself. I recalled how it felt, being transformed into the body of King Arthur, becoming the vessel of their worship, and never even thinking to resist. I'm so sorry, but I can't back down. My scythe slowly moved toward my opponent. The reconstructed Sister Lumia and Berserk should have come to stop me, but it seemed like my mentor and the knight had managed to stop them. There was no one to interfere with the fight between Logos React and I.
Questioning, what is this? Is it Rongominiard? No, the structure is different. What is this?
To you, it's probably the Holy Lance, Rongominiad. The lance reciprocated my effort. Though it did not speak or mock me, it still helped me, as usual. Shouting, but to me, it's different. To me, this is Ad. Determined, I clenched the scythe even tighter. I poured out all my thoughts to this fickle thing that did not answer me anymore. Shouting, it's my friend. For a moment, Logos React was speechless.
Why am I here? I don't understand. This is illogical. Cannot comprehend. Cannot reach a judgment. The theory is contradictory. The calculations cannot be made complete.
As she muttered those words, she became weaker and weaker.
Questioning. What is death?
Perhaps that was the last question she ever asked. She gave up all of her resistance. The blade of my scythe cleaved through the woman's body. As I felt the sensation of cutting through flesh and bone, I reached out with one hand and caught the dagger that my mentor had thrown at me. Erosion. Without a thought in my mind, I slashed downward with that hand, and the shining golden dagger pierced through the body of Logos React. The dagger pierced straight into the area around her clavicle. Hopeful. Wait, is this? Would Logos React be stopped this easily? Could the deaths of my mother and Father Fernando be overturned? The woman did not scream in response to being stabbed. There was no blood either. She simply stopped moving, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. If erosion had worked properly, had the Husk King's mind been separated from her body. Just as I wanted to reach out to catch the falling body, I froze.
I understand. Now,
The body suddenly stopped falling and turned toward me.
is this why I was so obsessed? Is this death? Is this a graveyard? Is that so? That is why I was so obsessed with you. I was correct.
Though her face was still hazy, I got the distinct impression that she was staring straight at me. The corners of her mouth curled upwards in a smile.
You are my death.
Shocked, as soon as the words left her mouth, something changed. Shocked with a swish, the woman's body shattered in front of my eyes. She had turned into sand, red sand. In the space of a second, the body of Logos React had become a pile of abnormally bright red sand. It wasn't just the woman. Even Sister Illumia, Bazak, and the bone soldiers who were a certain distance away became sand too, and increased in volume so that it nearly covers the entire graveyard.
It can't be... Is it the transformative ability of the Philosopher's Stone? Fuck, so that's what kind of weapon Logos React is.
Understood.
Panic the Philosopher's Stone was originally one of the creations of the Atlas Institute. It's the ultimate place for storage, a book that can contain almost infinite amounts of information. Logos React itself was created using the Philosopher's Stone. Under a certain specific state, as long as it continues to store records, it will continue to multiply itself forever. That's why all the people disappeared. They were dragged in when Logos React tried to understand its death for the first time. So that's what being made to save the world yet being able to destroy it means.
It was a desert of red, stretching out infinitely, blanketing the world in red sand.
Worried Logos React realized her own abilities for the first time. This hypothetical world that she created will become buried in this soon. If we were exposed to her for a long time, we might even be broken down into the sea of information. If that happens, then...
Would reality be next? This was probably what Zepia was trying to stop. In order to prevent the entire world from turning into red sand, he had stayed in this village. That wasn't out of the goodness of his heart, or because of something simple, like a sense of justice or a love of humanity. He did this simply because he had decided to do so. He was a person who existed for this reason, as a prop-like human. A human-like prop. Then, suddenly, from the place where Logos React had disappeared, a giant shadow rose to the air. It was no longer in the shape of a person. The figure that had been constructed from the sand spread its majestic wings and stared down at us as we stood there, pathetically on the crimson earth. That was... a bird.
I was struck the bird of Hermes.
I recalled that that was the name of the god who protected travelers and merchants in Greek mythology.
Shadnatipla Hermes from Greek mythology ended up fusing together with the Egyptian god Thoth and the alchemist Mercurius. Sometimes he appears as a person, and other times as a bird. This is quite fitting, as Hermes was also responsible for guiding the souls of the dead to the underworld.
The divine bird that was meant to save humanity, but destroyed it instead.
I Pisela Bathic Day, you are my death.
The words were not spoken. Instead, the information had been given directly to my brain. Just like the first time I had met the Husk King, it had become something that could not speak.
That is why I have come this far to kill you. It was the right thing to do in order to prevent death. I shall define this as correct.
It spread its massive wings once more. I immediately yelled in warning when I sensed the staggering amount of magical energy that had gathered on those feathers. Shouting, "Sir?" Pained the sand-covered ground was littered with chunks of rock, as every single one of the pillars had been reduced to rubble. Apart from me, everyone else had been blown away. In the face of the overwhelming power of the feathers of sand, the incomplete bounded field was about as effective as a sheet of paper. As if pitying us for not being able to withstand even the simplest of its attacks, the diving bird circled in the sky above our heads. I could not speak. Pained, it wasn't just a physical problem. The force of the magical energy unleashed by those feathers had completely messed up my insides, and I felt as if my intestines had been crushed by someone. Even if I tried to strengthen myself enough to stand up, I wouldn't be able to do anything else. The divine bird in the sky had started to gather magical energy again. If that attack happened again, it would be impossible for us to survive. I never thought that a single strike was enough to stop me from even standing up. In terms of power, it was already comparable to Faker's hecatic wheel. If I took the range of the attack into account, it would be more powerful. However, since this was one of the 7 superweapons, this attack was probably only the tip of the iceberg of the divine bird's abilities. The bird continued to circle in the sky, as if to say that in its eyes, there was no difference between normal humans, mages, and even heroic spirits. Where was my mentor? I was still curled up on the ground, and I could only move my eyes. It seemed that Svin had managed to protect him in the nick of time. Bestial magecraft was best used for defense. However, even though they had only felt the shockwaves, they could not get up to their feet immediately. I could not, either. Even though I had strengthened myself and used my scythe for defense at the same time, that bombardment was too powerful. Stand up, I thought desperately. Don't fall for something this insignificant. It was just a couple of broken bones. Now was not the time to cower. No matter how much I tried to encourage and scold myself, I only managed to move my eyes and my lungs. I had been damaged badly, both physically and magically. I could not overcome it with my will alone, and anxiety continued to circle through my mind. Stand up, stand up, stand up. Why couldn't I stand up? How could I fall here before the mystery of my hometown was solved? Someone grabbed my hood. His hand and his voice pulled me back into consciousness.
Shouting? Wake up, Gray!
Sir Kay?
Didn't that thing say you were its death?
It seemed that the knight had also heard its thoughts. His armor had been completely wrecked by the attack. No, he had been hurt even more severely than I had. His chest plate had been pierced, and the rest of his armor was barely holding together. If he had been a regular person, I would have not believed that he was still breathing. Even so, the knight still stood there, determined.
Since it said that, forget about whatever nonsensical fairy tale about saving humanity or destroying it. There's nothing between you two now but the fight for survival.
The knight's words were pounding on my eardrums. I realized then that I had not released my grip on my scythe. This told me that it wasn't just my heart that hadn't given up, but my body as well.
And satisfied. Exactly. Make sure you don't lose it.
However, I still couldn't do it. It was simply too late. That blow was too powerful for my mentor Flat, Sveen, and I. Though I had regained my will, the Reaper was still barreling towards us as we were helpless. The divine bird, Hermes, flew towards us. Feathers of sand full of magical energy shot from the wings of the divine bird Hermes. We had already witnessed its power, enough to destroy a fortress along with the army inside it, comparable to that of an anti-fortress noble phantasm. However, this time, the bombardment had deviated drastically. Huh? I looked blankly at the destruction some distance away from me. The large craters that had been created on the desert showed that its power had not diminished in the slightest. The divine bird also started wobbling as it flew in the sky, and spread its wings so that it wouldn't fall. My eyes widened. At the same time, a lively voice came from behind me.
Bingo! Bingo! It's not every day I get a chance to say this, so let me do Trimow's job for her. Come on, Hermes. Throw away your chicken's hit wings. I'm joking, of course, but I almost found a weakness when Grace stabbed that mystic coat into it.
Flat said as he lay face down on the ground. barely managing to hold his hand up. Beside his hand, there was a crystal ball. It was probably one of the countless crystal balls that had been floating in the space where they had met with Zepia.
Embarrassed I grabbed one of these before we got here. Mr. Zappia probably noticed it, but that doesn't matter.
That meant that it was a mystic code of the Atlas Institute that could be connected to Logos React. Though it wasn't easy, did it mean that Flat, who excelled in intervention, could use it to hack into Logos React? Sveen said, wiping the blood on his chin, he should have been hurt the most out of the three, as he was the one who protected them. However, he looked even more noble when he was covered in blood. At the same time, Flat's attitude towards Svav was extremely natural. He didn't thank the other teenager, nor did he show embarrassment. The two, who were usually constantly bickering, now seemed like two parts of the same being.
Exactly! Since we've said that we won't lose ever again, not even to a grand puppeteer, if we retreat like this, we'll be too ashamed of ourselves to return to the El-Melloi classroom.
It was an innocent yet fearless smile. Perhaps that was the nature of a mage. In that period of time, the image that had been reflected in the crystal ball kept on changing. Many symbols and numbers appeared, and Flat looked at them, intrigued, as he kept tapping rhythmically with his fingers. It was similar to what he had done before, but not quite the same. He looked as if he was playing a piano, or some similar instrument.
Questioning how is it, Flat?
Confident I just need to fix the malfunctioning parts of Logos React, right? Gotcha! I'll start looking for it now so that the data about Gray's mother can be...
Flat?
Flat seemed to not take notice of this.
A calculated spans are being used to counter my hacking. But it still gets already?
This was probably the first time I had heard something like this from the teenager, who always seemed happy and relaxed. Title cast by Artale Studio. Please subscribe to our channel if you enjoy listening. Flat activated his bestial magecraft and put one hand on Flat's back. This was probably the same thing my mentor had done with Luvia before, a connection of magic circuits. By multiplying the two circuits, the speed of the calculations increased. However, even so, they could not contend against Logos React. Could not even the two best students of the El-Melloi classroom get even close to the ability of one of the 7 superweapons of the Atlas Institute? Flat's situation stabilized for about 10 seconds, but the same went for the divine bird too. It regained control and began to leisurely fly towards us again. If it tried attacking us again, would Flat still be able to make it miss us? No, it probably wouldn't be possible.
Should I say that this is only what someone could expect from one of the 7 superweapons? Since we won't be able to increase the speed of our calculations, we can only try and slow it down. Determined, then, our only choice is to stab it again with erosion.
My mentor looked toward the object that I was holding in my arms. I had managed to retrieve this dagger.
Analytical erosion didn't pierce through its body entirely. That's why it ended up becoming stubborn to the point of calling you its death. After they came here, the Husk King and Logos React became even more closely bonded together.
For some reason I had the same understanding. The Husk King had not been separated from Logos React yet. Or rather, I had felt that something had protected against the separation the moment before it was going to happen. Logos React believed that in order for it to understand the concept of death, it needed the Husk King, or something like that. If that was the case, we'll need to use erosion to separate them completely. Would that be enough to resolve the situation? But how do we do that? The divine bird is flying around, and we can't get up there.
I see, so we will just need to stop it from flying. I'll take care of it.
Sir Kay?
Though we've only known each other for half a day, we've had a good time together, haven't we, Lord El-Melloi II?
The knight looked up at the sky. The divine bird spread its wings for the 3rd time.
It really doesn't know when to stop, does it?
Why didn't I step up to try and stop the hazy night from advancing toward the divine bird? It's okay.
No matter where I am, what I do doesn't make a difference. That's why I never even managed to reach the Hill of Camelin.
The Hill of Camelin. In my memory, that was the place where King Arthur had met her end. Though he was a knight of the Round Table, he had not participated in the battle at all. He had died before he could. Questioning. Are you... A loud voice inside my head yelled at me to stop him. However, even without that voice, it already took all of my strength to stay upright. The others were not capable of moving around freely, either. So the only reason why the knight still acted like it was simply because he lacked a material form.
You know, Gray, I've always thought that if you were even the tiniest bit more hesitant, I could have just slacked off and gotten away with it. I never thought that you'd be so defiant. It goes for this time as well. You said a lot of stuff that made it sound like you were giving up, but you didn't end up sinking into a whirlpool of pointless self-abuse. You're actually pretty good at this.
That was definitely not my strong point. If it was the me of the past, I would have easily given up. However, the many cases and people that I had seen had changed me a little bit. However...
It must feel good being alive and able to change like that. Don't leave your heart with the dead. What you see now is only a shadow. No matter if you're looking at a hero who's achieved all sorts of great things or a remnant of the past like me, we're all just dead people. The living shouldn't be held down by our existence. I do. I say that. No child would hate a fairy tale with a hero in it, would they? It could be used to give you dreams like cheap wine. Ha 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 ha! It might not even be that bad to live like your mentor.
A new wave of red sand was about to be sent toward us from the wings of the divine bird. The knight stood in front of us, blocking its way.
And DDT-B to got the day. Begin simulation.
He raised his right hand. Though his movements were light, I could feel a dense concentration of magical energy there.
Noble phantasm? Set. I'll ignore the precise parameters. I'm not even a heroic spirit, just someone imitating Galahad.
It was the knight's noble phantasm. He drew a circle with his fingers, and a strange white mist appeared in the middle of the desert of red sand. Perhaps it was a noble phantasm that was meant to originate from water. However, it was only a simulation. It wasn't possible for someone like Sir Kay, who wasn't a servant, to create even the hypothetical construct of a noble phantasm. Servants were simply too special. If he wanted to force himself to do so, not only would he not succeed, he would also die. Sir Kay.
Under assuring, don't worry about me.
For the first time, only for a moment, I saw his face. That was probably because of the large concentration of magical energy that he had gathered for the simulation of a noble phantasm. It was a face that looked slightly troubled, yet carried a smile that looked like it belonged to someone with a terrible personality. That probably wasn't what the knight was supposed to look like. Just like what he said about how the Husk King wasn't the true King Arthur, that appearance was a mixture of Ad and his original face. Even so, or perhaps, because of that very reason, to me it was...
Understood me. It'll be fine. Idiot Gray.
The knight, who had been looking at me, turned to face the bombardment and shouted.
Shouting deploying pseudo-noble phantasm Camelot image, the ephemeral yet unforgettable castle?
Was that the fortress itself? A Camelot made of mist rose up around the knight. It was that beautiful castle of chalk, praised by bards and poets from ancient times to the present. That castle, where it was said that as long as the famous knights of the Round Table were gathered, no invaders or monsters would ever be able to enter. I had thought that not even a hypothetical construct could be created, that even if he had managed to unleash it, by some miracle it would only cause his death. Just then, the knight had proved that it was possible. However, as if trying to say that even miracles like this were fakes, the feathers of the divine bird still fell upon us. It was as if it was a castle made of glass. For a few seconds the walls blocked the attack, but they were quickly shattered.
Damn it! But it was nice to see. I've already grown sick of looking at that beautiful castle.
His figure disappeared in the flurry of dust. However, something else appeared from the dust, just as it prepared to spread its wings for another attack. Something struck the divine bird with an incredible amount of force. It was one of the bird's own feathers of sand. I raised my hand to block the shockwave of the explosion and understood what had happened. The castle of mist did not protect the knight's body at all. That had never been the plan. The castle that he said he had long since grown tired of looking at did not have the ability to do that. However, it absorbed some of the divine bird's feathers and shot them back at it like a trick shot. Of course, the attack from the divine bird was effective. The super weapon was now falling from the sky, being dragged by gravity toward the earth. It was as if that weak knight, who had never properly won a battle, had never lost at anything, whether it was another knight or a monster, as if that was the embodiment of his life. "Sir Kay." There was no response. The sharp-tongued knight disappeared without a trace, as if he had been an error from the very beginning. I should have expected that, even if he hadn't taken the full force of the attack, imitating a noble phantasm as a non-servant was enough to destroy his spirit origin. I recalled what he said when I used Rongaminiad and undid the Seal of 13. This is a battle to live. It was the first voice that gave its approval. Perhaps that was why he had commented on me, because I wanted to live. I desperately resisted the urge to collapse to the ground. If I did now, everything the knight did for us would go to waste. "Sir Kay?" No matter how I called for him, he would not respond. However, in his place,
I think I've slept quite enough.
a strange, piercing noise came from my scythe. Why did I feel so overjoyed to hear this voice again, after parting with it for less than a day? "Add?"
I've finally woken up. I know everything that happened because I share that guy's memory, but you've really gotten yourself into trouble.
Emotional. Like usual, the eyes on the scythe opened, and it spoke to me with a voice full of emotion. What should I do? I felt tears in my eyes. I felt as if I only ever knew how to cry. I was too weak to be of any use. But now I knew that I needed to fight, no matter what. Emotional. Add.
Yeah! Yes, can't be a bit gentler. Don't forget that when I wake up, your strengthening also gets stronger.
Yes. The magical energy I used for strengthening was split between myself and Ad. That was the natural result, with Ad joining the battle in a place so rich in mana. More magical energy than I had ever felt before was now circulating within my body. "Please lend me your power," Ad bliffed.
Really no talking you out of it. I'll only lend you a little. Don't cry too much about it.
Of course not. I held back my emotions, though I was at my breaking point, and took off from the ground. Lord El-Melloi II watched the knight's pseudo-noble phantasm deflect the divine bird's attack, and watched it fall to the ground.
Sure enough, he thought, that figure that said to "hand it to me" filled him with a sense of nostalgia. Those were the words of someone who was prepared to never return again. That was how the king who had changed the course of his life had rode forward with his scarlet cape fluttering behind him. He felt a twinge of envy. "Don't leave your heart with the dead, Furnace," he said. He smiled a wry smile. Could there be any words more biting to him than those? Though that person had followed up by saying that he didn't hate fairy tales, he must have been hated at the round table for having such a foul mouth. Perhaps he had also been indispensable for that reason.
Can you give us some instructions?
Oh, of course.
The divine bird that had soared in the sky not long ago was now tilting dangerously to one side. As a result, the speed of its calculations had also greatly decreased. Though it had not slowed down decisively yet, there was still a mountain of preparations that needed to be done.
Determined flat. I'll send my plan of the spell over to you now. This will probably be more effective against Logos React.
He poured in some magical energy along with the pattern. After receiving the thought, Flat blinked twice.
Yes, I am able to analyze it on a theoretical level. This is enough for you to work with, yes?
Enthusiastic, of course, Professor. Just leave it to me. This is like giving a demon a golden rod, giving a karate master a boomerang.
The Knight of the Round Table was no longer there. They would not be able to withstand another attack from the divine bird. If they were hit again by the feathers, he could be sure that not a single person would survive. Even so, no one felt afraid. Flat Escardos was sometimes called the child cursed with blessings. The Escardos family was one of the few truly ancient families in the clock tower. Usually, even a long-lived magic crest would rot over a long period of time. Because of this, none of his ancestors had been remarkable mages. That made the Escardos family one of the few exceptions to the rule that older things carried stronger mystery. However, if you asked if the birth of the prodigy named Flat had been a welcome surprise, the answer would be no. At first, they were glad. They had revelled in the joy of finally producing something exceptional, as a family that had been mocked for a lineage of mediocrity. However, the excessive excellence of this child made it impossible for them to feel happy for long. Perhaps you could say that he was too exceptional. Actually, he had almost died at the hands of his own parents. That was why they called him the child who was cursed with blessings. Though he had been gifted with a gift that almost every mage coveted, he was also hated.
Why would I be thinking of that now? He thought, as he built the spell according to the plan that he had just received from Lord El-Melloi II.
He always thought that he couldn't unleash his full potential for fear that everyone around him would suffer because of it. Why did he need to try when he could slack off? It was easy to fake a smile by using magical energy to shift his facial muscles. There was hardly anyone who could see through this disguise. However, this was only the case before he met his professor and Svin.
Sir, this guy smells like an absolute mess. Can I get rid of him? What? Are you really going to let someone like him become my underclassman? With a smell as annoying as that, he'll definitely just be a bother. Won't it be better to bite him into pieces before he gets the chance to?
What was he meant to do? That was his deepest secret. What his professor had said affected him in a way that went without saying, but hearing Sven comment on him like that made him so excited he felt his hair stand up on end. Of course, it was no wonder. He licked his lips. He was no longer afraid anymore, not only of his talent or what motivated him, but also of what committing further would bring. That was because... Excited, he looked toward the divine bird. Because there lay the much-awaited challenge where he could go all out, where going all out might not even be enough.
I nodded and took off from the ground. In a single step, I reached the place where the knight had disappeared. I did not turn my head to look back. I didn't have the time to do that. I could not waste the instant that he had given me. I leaped forward before the divine bird could fly into the sky again, and shouted. Shouting, "Add! Release first stage restrictions."
It's the first time you've used that thing, isn't it? Can you make it?
The scythe transformed back into a box for a split second, before spinning like a Rubik's Cube, and changing into a giant wing-shaped boomerang. However, I didn't plan on using it as a boomerang, but as a hang glider, though I wouldn't be able to glide over a long distance. As long as I had a sufficient running start, I should be able to glide for a little bit. Though I had never used it in this form before, I glided through the air as if I was being instructed by someone. I jumped to the back of the divine bird and began to run after, doing a few rolls. The divine bird reacted to that, and the red sand on its back turned into spikes and shot toward me. Shouting, it changed back into a scythe so I could block the attacks. I was very sure of my target. That was only natural, since Logos React still contained the mind of King Arthur. I could clearly see a point on its back. I swung my lance, cutting apart another wave of the sand spikes, and jumped up with the nimbleness of a clown walking a tightrope. As I was in the air, I threw out the dagger with all my might. Of course, it only managed to pierce through its feathers. The erosion wasn't much sharper than any regular dagger, so it was impossible for it to pierce through the divine bird's heart. Spikes of sand continued to appear. However, the shouting released first aid restrictions, battering ram. The scythe changed into the shape of a battering ram. It was supposed to be a siege weapon used by multiple people to break open the walls of a fortress, comparable to a servant with a level D mana burst skill. It was the most powerful weapon that Ad could become. I let all of my remaining magical energy flow into it and crushed all the incoming spikes of sand. Shouting, "Ah!" I swung the battering ram downward forcefully and into the golden dagger. The divine bird faltered dramatically. It finally fell to the ground and I was tossed into the air. I tried my best to protect myself, but luckily I was going in the direction of my mentor Flat and Sveen. Perhaps the divine bird had been trying to use me to attack them. Regardless, my mentor looked towards the divine bird and gave an instruction.
Shouting now, Flat.
Immediately, the teenager began to recite a spell.
Shouting, game select, circuit, full commit.
Light poured forth from Flat's hands. Through my magic circuits, I could tell that the light was made from many complicated numbers and symbols. No, the light didn't come from only Flat. It actually came from Svin, who provided large amounts of magical energy as he stood there with one hand on Flat's shoulder. Flat skillfully manipulated the light with the support of Svine's sense of smell and the supplementary ode. The light extended toward the crystal ball, and perhaps because of the spell that my mentor gave them, it became a chain of mystery. The alchemist's bird made of red sand was captured by those chains. However, the divine bird had no intention of taking the attack. From the surprised look that suddenly appeared on the teenagers' faces, I could tell that another kind of power was flowing through the chains toward them. That was the only part of it that I could understand. The scales of victory were still quivering between the two sides. The invisible clash mesmerized me, and I lost track of time. Worried. "Who will win?" I said, trying to keep my exhausted body upright and gazing at the struggle, at a loss of what to do. Suddenly, a familiar smell reached my nose. My mentor had begun to smoke a cigar. He had probably taken it out as I was concentrating on what was happening over on the other side.
Is there still a need to ask? The result of the battle was decided a long time ago. If we didn't know what our opponents were capable of, then perhaps it might be different, but we've already determined that.
I listened to my mentor's words with a sense of wonder. His eyes squinted slightly, as if with envy, or perhaps jealousy, or maybe like he was gazing at a faraway star.
How would my students lose?
My mentor said, not because he trusted them too much, or because that statement was forced, but because it was something obvious. And then, the result was just as he had said. Sepilag from me.
Dash, is it really all right if you don't visit your mother?
The person who asked me the question was Zepia, who stood in the shade of a tree to be out of the sunlight. We were all outside the village, at the foot of the mountain. It was now some time in the evening, and the sun had mostly sunk into the horizon. Even so, it seemed that sunlight was still troublesome for the director of the Atlas Institute. Apart from his usual cape, he had also donned a hood. My mother's all right?
Yes, though she and Father Fernando were in a critical condition. After administering some first aid, Sister Illumia took them to a hospital nearby with connections to the Holy Church. Their lives shouldn't be in danger. The Church doesn't know anything about how she took your place, and her link with the Husk King has also been completely severed. You don't have to worry about whether or not she will become some sort of magecraft specimen. In terms of what else happened, nobody in the village died.
It almost felt like a joke, like mountains had parted only to reveal a single mouse. After such a comically large amount of turmoil, I found it difficult to believe that it would end in such a peaceful way. Or perhaps it would be more fitting to say that we had made it into a peaceful ending. I rubbed my shivering shoulders. The frigid wind was a little harder to bear. As we had just been in the summer of the second cycle, not long ago.
Analytical. I suppose you could say that the mind of King Arthur the Husk King is an exception. In actuality, she was only returned to the inside of Logos React as a mental model. The concept of time is vague for a being that does not have a body or a soul. So the months that she spent underground was equivalent to a couple of minutes of napping.
Around half a day had passed since the battle. After we had been released from that space, we had listened to Zepia's explanations, as he finished what he called dealing with the aftermath. According to him, the contract that meant that the Atlas Institute had to lend out Logos React until King Arthur was revived, or ruled as incapable of being revived, was still in place. The main reason why this case happened, Logos React, which had fused with my mother in the mind of King Arthur, seemed to have entered a state of self-diagnosis and self-repair. It would probably remain that way for the next couple of years, and considering the intervals between the few key Holy Grail wars, there should be no need to worry about it for the time being. Of course, the old woman who believed in King Arthur the most fervently wouldn't give up, but you could say that it didn't matter either way. The only reason why she had gone as far as to fight openly with the Holy Church was because a chance to reunite the body, mind, and soul had appeared. After this was no longer the case, she wouldn't be able to do anything. Does my mother know that I'm still alive?
My brother betrayed me. Should have been transmitted to her, because she was briefly fused with Logos React. Though most humans aren't capable of processing that many pieces of information, theoretically, she will be left with the impression that you are alive.
Relieved, that's all I need to know. As long as she knows I'm still alive. Worried if I went to visit her and the rest of the villagers happened to find out, there would be trouble. If that did happen, I didn't know what the desperate woman and the other believers would do. Speaking of that, the spell that he had cast on my button had still been in place, so it was a shock when we returned here to find that my face was different. Our bodies in the second cycle seemed to have been constructed by Logos React, so we didn't have even a scratch on us. No, there's no need to. Besides, my mother and I still need some time away from each other. I'll definitely meet her again one day, I thought. One day, but not now. Before that happened, I first needed to get my own thoughts in order. What did all the things she had done for me mean, and what did she think about them? In order to not make any more mistakes, I wanted to answer each one of my questions, and I didn't know how long that would take. Before that, though, it must have been disorienting for a lot of the villagers for summer to suddenly become winter as they were preparing to revive King Arthur. I didn't know what would happen to the village in the future, but it would be impossible for it to maintain the status quo. From that perspective, having my mother stay in a hospital with connections to the Holy Church seemed safer to me. Just as I considered this, my mentor spoke.
The chivalric orders haven't taken any action yet, so it seems that the Holy Church hasn't noticed the situation over here.
Huh? Isn't that strange? Since all the people in this village have disappeared for half a year, that means that Sister Illumia and Father Fernando haven't contacted them for that long as well, right? They were sent there to monitor the village, so wouldn't it seem weird if they didn't send any reports for that long?
That was true. Since this place was already under surveillance, the central members of the Holy Church should have done something. What would be a reason for them not to?
Heartless, isn't it?
Who knows?
Observant, my mentor shifted his gaze to his students.
Flat, Sven, can you scout out the town at the foot of the mountain? I don't think anything will come up, but it would be a problem if members of the Holy Church really came.
Getcha! No, it isn't. Determined we will try to return as soon as...
Cam used Flat and Svel, gave a quick salute before turning around quickly. They had started out walking peacefully on the road, but somewhere along the way, something happened between them that caused them to start arguing, which gradually turned into something that resembled a game of tag that involved magecraft. It was very much in their style. Though they hadn't sustained any injuries, they were probably still tired. So, seeing them acting so lively, should I say that that was what could only be expected from the twin juggernauts of the El-Melloi classroom? My mentor watched them go before turning to Zepie again.
Oh, and something else that caught my attention. Do you mind telling me something before we leave?
What?
I feel like the order is wrong.
Questioning the order.
Analytical, those 4 rules are connected to the magic circuits of the Gravekeepers. In other words, it's reasonable to assume that that was passed down the Blackmore line for generations, from long before the Common Era.
Yes, that is a reasonable assumption.
Bazak had probably returned to reality as well. No matter what happened to the village in the future, I don't think that the Gravekeeper who taught me all sorts of knowledge and skills would leave this place. Perhaps he would live out the entire rest of his life as the Gravekeeper of Blackmore Graveyard.
However, that Black Madonna is possibly modeled after Morgan Le Fay, so it's a relic of King Arthur's time, after the Common Era. Most people agree that she comes from around the 5th century, so why would a rule about the Black Madonna appear in the Gravekeeper's rules?
Those two don't necessarily contradict each other. The last rule was just added on afterwards. The Gravekeepers of Blackmore Graveyard were originally just skilled soul carriers.
True, magic crests are meant to be added onto by later generations, but those 4 rules were added far more recently than we assumed, right? For instance, maybe they could have been added a few centuries ago, around the same time when you became the director of the Atlas Institute.
Observant hearing my mentor's words, Zepia's eyebrow twitched slightly.
Manoid. Just say what you're trying to imply directly.
Half an analytical, I think the order is the opposite of what I just said. Actually, out of the 4 rules, the one about the Black Madonna was the one that had always been there to more efficiently discover someone with the potential to become King Arthur. That's what the statue functions as a mystic code. None of the other rules are necessary. Yes, though, they stop the villagers from accidentally getting too close to mystery, and because hiding the bounded field around the swamp would be quite difficult. However, those rules only tell people what not to do. Perhaps it might even be for the frequently visiting director of the Atlas Institute to be able to calculate the parameters of the villagers more easily.
My eyes widened.
Analytical, you have lent out Logos React to this land. And before the contract of Atlas is fulfilled or deemed incapable of being fulfilled, you cannot retrieve it. Of course, you must have set up some kind of mystic code used for monitoring this place, but if you were to intervene directly, that would violate the contract. We've already proven that with this case. Just like the magic circuits, the 4 rules only affect the Gravekeepers. You set those rules with the Gravekeeper back then, getting as close to violating the contract as you could without actually violating it.
After he listened to what my mentor had to say, the alchemist shrugged. He didn't deny it, though, and under these circumstances, that was the best confirmation we could get.
You really are patient and well-prepared.
You, the alchemists of the Atlas Institute, are still mages, which means you can never trust one completely. You should know that.
I listened to their conversation, speechless. In this case alone, my impression of Zephyr had been completely overturned 3 times already. How was I meant to understand someone like him? I first thought that he was a sinister person shrouded in mystery. After Logos React malfunctioned, he seemed like the stoic guardian of the world. And now, he gave me the impression of a crafty salesperson. No, it must have been all of this that joined together to form this dead apostle and alchemist named Zephyr El-Melloi II.
Is this what you noticed first?
Analytical. Yes, I thought of it when we discussed the Black Madonna and Morgan Le Fay in the underground temple. I only thought of it again because of a hint you gave us during the first cycle, something about how this place was connected to a dead apostle from 2,000 years ago.
Blackmore is the name of an ancient dead apostle with a connection to this land. A dead apostle who controlled birds and lived for more than 2,000 years ago, but was unfortunately killed in this script. I never thought that those would end up being related.
Hack, analytical next. All I have to do is follow this to its logical conclusion. Why are you here? Why would you bring up the graveyard and the 3 parts of a person? I'm a bit ashamed to admit it, but I only became sure of it when I read Heartless's evidence board.
This was a bit of a gamble for me as well. I can see many possibilities. and I can measure each of their probabilities. However, there is only ever one reality. Don't you plan on asking me about my deal with Heartless?
Confident, I don't need to. I'm already certain about that. It's different for what you gain from it, but what Heartless asked for is obvious.
Oh. Do you want to confirm it with me?
Hi. If Heartless wanted information about the ritual in this village, he wouldn't have needed to strike a deal with Gray's mother. Heartless is almost ridiculously cautious. In a certain sense, he's a bit like me, as he makes so much preparation that it makes him seem cowardly. If that's the case, there is one thing that he could have asked of you, which is to not calculate anything related to his future, right?
And that is how your knowledge of everything that he was involved in was limited. That's one of the reasons why you could only take a passive stance.
He pleased a lovely answer. And just in case you wanted to know, he provided me with data about the Holy Grail Wars in the past.
Worried hearing those words, I felt myself tense up. Heartless had carefully researched the Fuyuki Holy Grail Wars. That was why he had information that not even the director of the Atlas Institute knew. However, if Zepia needed this information...
There's no need to be worried. I have no intent on taking part in a Holy Grail war. I am just curious about the spells behind it. Yes, the process of summoning a servant, which can reproduce even the soul, is connected to the third magic which I wish for.
The body, the mind, and the soul. Up to this point, these three concepts had appeared countless times. However, it was said that no type of magecraft would be able to recreate a soul except with the use of the third magic, something that no mage would be able to attain, an impossible way for humanity to advance forward. However, that wasn't that closely related to this case, and my mentor did not ask more questions on the subject. Like my mentor would sometimes say during lectures, excessive knowledge can sometimes lead to danger. Zepia, however, tilted his head slightly.
Do you have another question?
Can I ask you something else?
You are more than welcome to do so.
The smell of dinner being cooked reached me. Perhaps it was a hallucination, or perhaps it was the scent of the food from some family at the foot of the mountain wafting by on the wind. It made me think back to my mother's stew. That taste, which had once sent chills down my spine, now made me feel nostalgic.
From your point of view, did I make the right choice?
Philosophical, that question is meaningless. Though incorrect scripts exist in this world, there is no correct choice. If such a thing did exist, then the Altus Institute would have been saved long ago. Or perhaps the end has already come. I wonder which ending would be easier for us.
Zepia ended that line there. I blinked. The sun had completely disappeared into the horizon. Under the cover of the sticky twilight, I thought I saw something appear on his lips.
However, I must say, that was a choice that nobody else could make except you, Lord.
Huh? I made an awkward sound. Maybe. But only maybe. I was so ensnared by this thought that I didn't even notice that Flatten's Veen had returned. At that moment, I thought that I saw the director of the Atlas Institute, someone so unnaturally emotionless that even a bit of anger felt like a computer having a bug, smile in a very human way. The first thing that struck me upon returning to London was the noise. The city was filled with all kinds of it, from the music blasting from radios and televisions to the voices of the people, the sound of car engines, the cries of children, and the noises produced by construction. All of it formed a harmony, becoming like some kind of band. Though there was lots of sound in the countryside as well, the biggest difference was that most of that came from people. That was a type of music that only sounded because the people were alive and had gathered together like they were being melted in a crucible. When I had first arrived in London, I thought that the rows of skyscrapers looked like gravestones. The people that surged into the desaturated buildings looked like a procession of the dead, headed toward the underworld. Now, I didn't think the same way. Buildings were buildings, and graveyards were graveyards. No matter how many people gathered in the same place, that fact would not change. There was no need to try and interpret some kind of special meaning from that. Perhaps these thoughts might change again with time, but today I didn't hate that thought. I finished everything that I had planned for the morning and boarded the bus. My destination was somewhere close to Slur Street, and after getting off, I walked towards the mansion that was not far from the station. After less than 10 minutes, I got there. As instructed, I walked around the house and to the back garden, where I walked in from the back door after ringing the doorbell twice. I was already familiar with the place, and I didn't need someone to guide me as I walked down the corridor. Even so, every time I took a step on the bright red carpet, I could feel my heartbeat speeding up. I suppose there was nothing I could do about that. Nervous Rains was waiting for me in the parlor. She saw what I was holding, and blinked several times in surprise.
Gray, what's that?
I wanted to have some desserts with you. Usually Miss Rains is the only one who prepares them. Nervous, I stood there stiffly, hugging the cheap paper bag that seemed so out of place in the elegantly decorated room. Though it was something that I had bought from the department store, I didn't have an eye for delicious things at all. Now, I am finally realizing the importance of being experienced when buying things. My treat for Miss Rains. Nervous Rains stared at me for a bit longer with a rare look of sincerity on her face. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became as if this was a blind date. However, seeing me stand there, struggling to hold the bag, she spoke.
Trimau, can you find some suitable tea?
Ma'am?
The Mercury maid performed a perfect curtsy and left the room. She had some white ceramic plates placed onto the table, and I felt a sense of regret as I saw the chocolates that I had brought sitting on them. Just from the presentation alone, I could tell that they could not compare to what Rains usually prepared for us at all. After tasting a piece at her urging, I felt even more ashamed. Even my ears were burning. I felt as if I was a stupid clown. How did I decide that this was a good idea? And then, Rains took a bite from a piece of chocolate in front of my eyes. Then she widened her eyes in surprise. Because she was in her own house, her eyes were a shade of brilliant red, which made me feel even more sorry for her.
It's good.
Eumarist. You don't need to take my feelings into consideration.
No, I think it's weird as well. It does taste incredibly normal. The temperature wasn't controlled well, so the texture is strange, and the cacao beans used were of mediocre quality, so it's lacking in flavor. But it really does taste good. Why?
The young woman tilted her head. She sank into thought, savoring every taste. It didn't look like she was lying. Then again, this wasn't some important social gathering, and I wasn't someone she needed to act polite towards. I took another piece of chocolate, with the feeling that I had been lied to. From the second piece onward, I realized that it did taste surprisingly good. Though I couldn't analyze the taste like Rains could, I could agree that yes, it was good.
Polite, it's because both of you are enjoying it at the same time. That is what Trimma thinks.
That's impossible. How could the taste of something change because of the people around you? Oh, no, nothing. Have some tea. Tea time is about both desserts and sweets.
Sure. I did as she said and surprised myself again. As soon as I drank the tea prepared by Trimau, the originally mediocre chocolate began to melt in my mouth. Though it still wasn't as exquisite as the desserts that Rains usually prepared, which were like they had been decorated with stars plucked out of the night sky, there was a very solid, calming taste there. Together we took more and more pieces of chocolate, savouring this wonderful time. Being able to enjoy desserts and tea together made me incredibly happy. And then, after quietly listening to my account of what had happened in my hometown, Rains spoke.
I'll let it go. I see. Though I've also received a report, I never thought that it would be related to the 7 superweapons of the Atlas Institute. Even for a lord, those are way too many annoying things to just come across randomly. Though I want to write it off as one, it seems like the cases you two have been a part of aren't just a coincidence. Yes, in a certain sense, the only coincidence was the initial meeting.
I didn't quite understand what she was trying to get at, and I tilted my head. Seeing this, a wry smile appeared on Rainer's face.
I'm talking about the initial meeting between you and my brother.
She waved her pale fingers across the table and brushed its edge. Those really were beautiful fingers, I thought, like those of a bisque doll created to be beautiful. However, I knew how many obstacles she had to overcome, and how heavy of a price she had to pay to get here.
Analytical, of course, my brother needed someone who was good at dealing with servants, but that's not why you two met. I suppose you could say that the same goes for Heartless. My brother and Dr. Today and Sal could, so, my brother and Dr. Tissummerdala. Heartless have so many things in common that it's uncanny. Perhaps it's because they both were the head of the Department of Modern Magecraft, but that doesn't cause their ways of thinking to be the same. Perhaps I should say that their characteristics are complementary. At least I think so. Just like Flat and Svin. If they were in the right situation, they could build a mutually supportive relationship. However...
In response to my question, Rains picked up 2 pieces of chocolate and held one in each hand before smashing them together.
both might meet their destruction.
Worried these words made my heart rate accelerate. The fact that it came from Rains, who was one of the people who understood my mentor the most, made it even more convincing. Rains put the 2 smashed pieces of chocolate into her mouth and looked up at the ceiling, swinging her legs.
Speaking of that, I've also come across something strange in my investigations.
Has something happened?
Analytical, it was the new year recently, and there were a lot of banquets being held. I decided to look around a bit. I met with informants from all 3 factions, the aristocratic faction, the democratic faction, as well as the neutral faction. I found that there were too few rumors being mentioned about the Holy Grail War. Yep, it is the war that caused the death of the previous Lord of the El-Melloi faction after all, but other people still think that it's an insignificant ritual in some remote place. For the 5th Holy Grail War, the clock tower even sent a sealing designator to Fuyuki, but this information doesn't seem to have gotten out there at all. The difference in how the information was distributed seems too unnatural.
Within the young woman's examinations, there hid the sensitivity that only someone who was used to the constant whirlwind of power struggles within the clock tower would have. Of course, my mentor had that ability as well, but he was different to Rains. In my opinion, I think that other than the amount of experience, it also had to deal with the natural differences between the personalities of different people.
There's only one organization in the entire world of Magecraft that can pull off something like that. The Department of Law.
Worried the image of a mage that we had met many times up to this point appeared in my mind. The woman that reminded me of a snake, who dressed in the clothing of the Far East. Hishiri Adashino. It wouldn't be surprising for her to use any means to reach her goal. In the cases at Adra Castle and the Rail Zeppelin, she did not give up even when faced with my mentor's deductions. However, there was another reason why thinking of her made me swallow. Sepia also said something similar after that.
Oh, what did he say?
Anxiously told her of the lines that the alchemist had calmly said to us. Heartless might be your enemy, but that doesn't make him the clock tower's enemy, he said. I shivered, and an uncomfortable feeling piled up at the bottom of my heart. The clock tower was not some kind of innocent and virtuous organization. It was a place affected by the desires of all sorts of people, corrupt to the core because of the complexity of the structure of power. In this sense, it was completely different from the Atlas Institute. It was impossible to tell an ally from the enemy. If that was the case, it would only be natural to assume that Heartless has allies within the clock tower.
I see. I'll look into it. But if we're dealing with the Department of Law here, it's best not to keep your hopes up. The Department of Law isn't always united within itself either.
Rainus closed one of her eyes, somewhat melancholily. Even in a place where scheming was the order of the day, the Department of Law was different. For that reason, Rainus was also limited in what she could do. Rains leaned forward until she was bent over the table like a mischievous cat. Her flame-coloured eyes shone brightly. Many people, men and women alike, had probably felt the soul-capturing power of the charm that radiated from them.
Willie? Was it?
As startled as Rains inched closer and closer to me, a loud, piercing voice sounded from the hook at my right shoulder.
Woke up to a delicious meal, didn't I? To think that someone as insignificant as Gray would attend a girls' meetup, you can count me in too. Even though boxes don't have genders, that doesn't matter here. If you're planning on having a pajama party, don't forget about me.
Annoyed, I felt that he was asking for it by this point, so I took the birdcage off of the hook and gave it a shake, though it made a loud cry that sounded like a large insect being smashed to death. I didn't care at all. Who cared about it anyway? It didn't even consider how worried it had made me not long ago. Rhines clapped her hands happily, while Trimo's mercury face emotionlessly reflected the image of the howling box. It was a very enjoyable time, to the point where I was worried that I might have overdone it and berated Ad too much and ended up apologizing to it, to the point where tears almost fell uncontrollably from my eyes. Actually, Zepia had said one more thing. However, I could not bring myself to tell it to Rains and Ad. This was what he said. It was after the fight with Logos React. Ad had sunk back into slumber, and Zepia had come to discuss something serious with me. My mentor Flat and Svin had also happened to be discussing their plans for the future, and they didn't focus their attention on us.
As thanks, let me give you a word of advice. It would be better if you didn't use Rangamaniad again.
Huh? His advice came out of nowhere, and for a moment, I didn't know how to react. Worried. Why?
Analytical. You used Rangamaniad before while you were on the Rail Zeppelin, right? That is indeed a noble phantasm fitting for the end of a case. Even the servants who play the main roles must succumb in the face of its power. However, you should be glad that you did not release the Seal of 13 completely. Otherwise, Ad would have undoubtedly been broken.
That reminded me. Ad had been sleeping more ever since the case at the Rail Zeppelin. Was that because it needed to repair itself?
Analytical is a very intricate mystic code and can repair itself to a certain extent. However, that would be too much, though incomplete. The burden of unleashing the full power of the lens should not be underestimated. I don't blame you, though. This was a problem even for the original one. Analytical, you haven't noticed? There were restrictions put on Ad's memory, but it became very obvious once the mental model of Sir Kay appeared from it. It even successfully created a pseudo-noble phantasm. Though that's a feat that was only possible in an imaginary space within the original.
After a pause, the alchemist of the Atlas Institute made an announcement.
The core of Ad is actually Logos React Replica.
The words of the alchemist were stuck in my heart, like a thorn that I could not remove. Perhaps my mentor had already noticed it as well. Just like Zepia said, that was a truth that could be reached by stacking a few deductions together. With my mentor's capabilities, it would be more unnatural if he hadn't noticed. However, what about the possibility that Ad would break? There were not many situations where I needed to unleash Rangamaniad. However, if we continued to be involved with Heartless, I couldn't be certain that such a situation would not come up. The Holy Grail War also came up multiple times, and I could not ensure that nothing problematic would come up. If the life of my mentor or Rains was in danger, would I use Rangamaniad again? This question swirled around my mind. It was the first time that I had been so fixated on something in my life. The next morning, I left my dorm room and headed out towards Druid Street. There was still a chill in the air, and each breath brought with it a cloud of white. Even if I told everyone in London about how we were experiencing summer a few days ago, nobody would believe us. The classes at the El-Melloi classroom had not resumed yet. That was because my mentor, the most important person there, had not returned yet, though the classes were being taught by all of the other highly skilled teachers of the Department of Modern Magecraft, under the lead of Shardan. Something felt missing from the classroom. I stepped off of Druid Street and into a side road shrouded by a bounded field. This apartment would sometimes have an unwelcome guest in the form of Yvette, and the other students had often patrolled the area to keep her out. That resulted in the place turning into a dueling arena, before my mentor had chased them all away. I had witnessed all of this not long ago. I walked up the spiral staircase and knocked on the door a few times before just pushing it open. The door wasn't locked, and as soon as I walked into the foyer, I could see that incredibly messy room. There were books, documents, clothes, cigarettes, and bottles of what resembled medicine scattered all over the room, along with a few bottles of alcohol, cans, and other miscellaneous items, creating a kind of chaos unlike any other. I couldn't help but smile a wry smile when I saw that familiar figure inside the room. Perhaps he was a bit too relaxed, I thought. My mentor was reclined on the sofa, with his back to a replica of a painting depicting the cutting of the Gordian knot. To be exact, it was more like he was laying on top of the sofa. He was concentratedly gripping onto the game controller in his hands. "Sir, I've bought the snacks and drinks that you asked for."
Distracted. Thanks. Just put them over there.
My mentor said with a cigarette in his mouth as he stared unblinkingly at the LCD screen. He had a slight stubble on his chin. He had probably played through the entire night. He said that he was staying home to rest up and recover, and I didn't expect that he would end up using it all to game. Now, I take back what I just said. I had long since anticipated that this would happen. It was my mentor, after all. I sighed. "Can I at least help you comb your hair?"
Distracted. Do whenever you want to.
My mentor said, not shifting his gaze from his screen. Seeing him stare that intently, I started to worry somewhat about his eyes, but there was probably a way to fix that with Magecraft. If that time really came, he'd probably grumble for an entire week about the bill that had one more digit than one from a regular doctor. Either way, I asked him to sit in a position that made it easier for me to comb his hair and gently picked up a strand of hair. I took out a comb and started brushing it for him. Though he lived so carelessly, there were hardly any split ends. Was this because of some kind of magecraft? Though I knew that he had grown out his hair for the sake of magecraft, I remembered him mocking himself once by saying that there wasn't much of a risk or much of a reward for a male mage to do this. It was very much in my mentor's style to criticize himself while still continuing to do something, though. The game that he was playing now seemed like an RPG, and every time the red-haired armored protagonist swung the sword, monsters fell with fancy-looking effects. My mentor had played all sorts of games, but he seemed to like Japanese-style RPGs the most. "Can I ask you something?"
As long as you don't mind me answering while I play.
Hearing this careless answer made me happy for some reason. Only a little bit, though. I eyed the things that were on the table. "Did Mr. Melvin bring these?"
Yes. He came over the day we arrived back in London and forced me to accept a bunch of Magecraft medicines, canned food, and wine. I happened to be hungry, so I took it.
I see. Half were necessities, and half were non-essential. It looked like something that Melvin would do. He understood how my mentor would temporarily accept things if he needed it. However, he would probably carefully catalogue everything that my mentor took and add it all to the list of favours that my mentor needed to repay. That self-proclaimed best friend of best friends was generous, yet counted his debts like a devil at the same time. However, the fact that he was concerned and came to visit my mentor at a time like this made me happy. This case had been far too exhausting. Though we had solved it, we had both returned with scars. Even if they were invisible to the eye, they could affect our will to go on. This was the first time that nobody had died. The fact that we had successfully saved my mother and Father Fernando should have made me happy and satisfied, but only a sticky feeling of fatigue remained in me. Perhaps this was because I felt that this was not over. The case was not over yet. We had not gotten to the most crucial part. For a time there was only the sound of the game, breathing, and the comb softly swishing across hair. Then my mentor suddenly spoke.
I shouldn't have asked that question.
He didn't have to elaborate for me to know what he was talking about. It was the question he had asked Zepio whether he had made the correct choice.
I thought that I'd grown at least a little bit, but I haven't changed at all. I'm still as immature as I used to be. It really is hard for people to change.
You said something similar when we first met. I recalled what he had said. I haven't grown at all. Nothing has changed since then, I haven't gotten even a single step closer to the person I wanted to be. I had felt the blood that seeped from those words. It was probably because of this that I had chosen to follow my mentor. I had thought that even if this person would not give me the correct answer, we could suffer together. I was not wrong. However, I never thought that we would end up suffering like this. I'm even less mature than you are, so I always want to shout that I want someone to tell me that what I did was right.
Both of us are lazy then, aren't we?
Perhaps. I slowed down the brushing of his hair and nodded. A brief silence settled upon the room again. The hero in the game was running furiously. It seemed as if the end was approaching. The wizard had already learned many pages full of spells. I couldn't help but feel a sense of irony, seeing my mentor control a character that used magic.
There's something I want to tell you first. Cherish your friends. Even if it's become an untenable situation, you don't need to pay some sort of strange price for me. I'm already resigned to my fate of having to rely on the protection of my students, but if I'm bringing my students any necessary suffering, I might as well go die.
He saw straight through me. Ad was still asleep and did not interrupt. My mentor continued gaming with a face so expressionless he looked like he hated life. Had he already figured out what I was troubled about? Or did he just not care? Or was he just as troubled by it as I was? All right. That's not fair, sir.
Confused though.
Yes. You keep asking things of other people, but you're always making sacrifices. That's way too irresponsible.
I'm sorry.
He hung his head and apologized sincerely. I forgive you, but you have to answer my question.
What question?
I continued to comb his hair as I quietly adjusted my breathing. I had wanted to ask about this for the past couple of days. I hurriedly organized my thoughts into something coherent and spoke. You said something during the second cycle about how you didn't have the courage to meet a version of me that didn't know you. It seemed like he was reluctant to think about what he said then. Actually, I felt embarrassed about it as well. If my mentor had not recognized me, I was sure that I would have had a breakdown on the spot. Perhaps I would have even physically fallen apart. However, I needed to know the answer to this question, no matter what it took. Then, do you have the courage to meet a version of you, King, that doesn't know who you are? He didn't respond immediately. You've probably already made mental preparations for that, right? You said something on the rail Zeppelin about how you wouldn't be able to repay the happiness of having those memories, even if you spent your entire life. But does being prepared mean that you have the courage to do something like that? What does a person have to do to gain that kind of courage? I needed courage too, I thought, so I could go and meet my mother again before I figured out exactly what I had to say. So I wouldn't have to wait for Ad and Rhinus to notice what was on my mind, and could tell them the truth. So I could tell everyone around me that if they were not there, I would be too scared to even fall asleep. What should I do to find that kind of bravery? For a moment, there was only the sound of the clacking of keys. I would wait, though I didn't think of myself as a patient person. Sometimes, I could wait for something, no matter how long it took. Finally,
Since I've given up on taking part in the Fifth Holy Grail War, I won't get to meet him again anyway.
with those words as an opening statement, he held on to the cigarette with his fingers. Grey smoke drifted up toward the ceiling. As it did, my mentor spoke in a low voice.
But I've still thought about what I'd say to him if some kind of miracle did happen. So no, I don't have the courage to do that. However, if a day like that really comes, regardless of whether I have the courage to or not, I hope I can be someone who can walk up even though I'll say the wrong thing. That's all I have to say.
His somewhat embarrassed expression was reflected in my heart. The overly sincere look in his eyes even made me feel troubled. Everything from Ad's true form to the clock tower and Heartless seemed distant at that moment, and all my attention was focused on the comb in my hands. I knew very well that this time would not last, because both my mentor and I knew that, just like the Holy Grail War, this series of events centered around the clock tower was about to reach its final act.